Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Patricia Johnson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Savage River State Forest in western Maryland, during what was supposed to be a peaceful weekend retreat with my work colleagues from the Baltimore accounting firm, where I'd been grinding away for the past 6 years. The idea came from Marcus, our department supervisor, a weekend camping trip to build team cohesion and reconnect with nature. 5 of us agreed to go: myself, Marcus, Janet Reed from payroll, Kevin King from IT, and Sarah Rodriguez, the newest hire who'd been eager to make friends since moving from Phoenix. We'd chosen Savage River because it was remote enough to feel like an adventure, but close enough to civilization that even Kevin, who'd never slept outdoors in his life, felt confident about it. I should have paid attention to the name, Savage River. It should have been a warning. We arrived Friday evening in 2 cars, Marcus driving his SUV with the camping gear, the rest of us following in my Honda. The October air carried that crisp bite that promised winter wasn't far behind, and the forest felt ancient around us, thick with oak and maple trees that towered like cathedral pillars. Our campsite sat in a clearing beside the river, about 3 miles from the nearest marked trail and at least 10 miles from any other campers. "Perfect isolation," Marcus had said, grinning as he surveyed our surroundings. No cell service, no distractions. Just us and the wilderness. My phone showed 0 bars. Janet's too. We laughed about it then, joking about being off the grid for the weekend. None of us were laughing by Sunday morning. The first night passed without incident. We built a fire, roasted hot dogs, shared stories from work and our personal lives. Sarah talked about her ex-husband and why she'd moved across the country for a fresh start. Kevin surprised us all by revealing he'd been writing poetry in his spare time. Janet had brought bourbon, and we passed it around while the fire crackled and the river murmured its ancient song nearby. I felt more relaxed than I had in months. The constant stress of tax season, difficult clients, and long hours melted away in the warmth of the flames and the easy camaraderie of my colleagues. Even Marcus seemed different out here, less like a boss and more like a friend. We turned in around midnight, each of us retreating to our individual tents arranged in a rough circle around the fire pit. I listened to the night sounds through my tent walls, the river's constant whisper, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, an owl calling somewhere in the darkness. City-born and raised, I found these wilderness sounds oddly comforting. They spoke of a world that existed long before humans arrived and would continue long after we were gone. I must have slept deeply because I didn't hear Janet screaming until Marcus was shaking my tent. "Patricia, wake up! Something's wrong with Janet." I stumbled out of my sleeping bag, my heart immediately racing. The fire had died to glowing embers, casting everything in an eerie red twilight. Janet sat beside the cold ashes, rocking back and forth, her sleeping bag draped around her shoulders like a shroud. "She was screaming," Kevin said, his voice shaky. He stood near his tent, fully dressed despite the early hour. "Woke me up. She won't tell us what happened." Sarah knelt beside Janet, trying to coax her to speak. Janet's eyes were wide and unfocused, staring at something none of us could see. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "It was in my tent," she said. "It was touching my face." "What was in your tent?" Marcus asked gently. "Fingers. Cold fingers. They smelled like meat that's gone bad." We searched her tent with flashlights but found nothing. No tears in the fabric, no signs of intrusion. The ground around her tent showed no footprints except our own. Marcus suggested she'd had a nightmare. Not uncommon when camping for the first time. Janet didn't argue, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. She knew what she'd experienced. We rebuilt the fire and sat with Janet until dawn, when the forest began to wake around us with birdsong and the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. In daylight, the incident seemed less ominous. Janet even managed a shaky laugh, apologizing for waking everyone. "Just nerves," she said. "All these new sounds and darkness. My imagination got the better of me." But I noticed she stayed close to the group all morning, reluctant to wander even a few yards from the campsite. We spent Saturday hiking along the river, following game trails that wound between ancient hemlocks and past moss-covered boulders the size of houses. The Savage River lived up to its name in places, churning white over rocky drops and carving deep pools that looked black in the shadows. Sarah found it beautiful. Kevin seemed nervous about getting too close to the water. It was Marcus who found the bones. We'd stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook where we could see for miles across the forest canopy. While we ate sandwiches and shared trail mix, Marcus decided to explore a small clearing about 50 yards from our picnic spot. We heard him call out, but not in alarm, more like curiosity. "Hey, you all need to see this," he shouted. We found him standing over what looked like the remains of a campfire, but much older than ours. The stones were covered in moss and lichen, and leaves had collected in the center where the ashes should have been. Scattered around the old fire ring were bones, lots of them, too many to be from a single animal. "Deer bones, probably," Marcus said, picking up what looked like a femur. "Hunters might have dressed their kills here." But Sarah, who'd grown up in Arizona ranch country, shook her head. "These aren't all deer bones," she said quietly. "Look at this." She pointed to a skull half buried in leaves. It was too small to be a deer, but too large to be a rabbit or squirrel. The shape was wrong too. Elongated, with a prominent brow ridge and teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "What kind of animal has teeth like that?" Kevin asked. None of us had an answer. We left the bone pile and returned to our campsite, but the discovery had cast a shadow over the day. The forest that had seemed magical that morning now felt watchful, as if unseen eyes tracked our movements through the trees. Every shadow could hide something predatory. Every rustle in the underbrush made us turn our heads. As evening approached, we gathered wood for another fire. Janet and I worked together, collecting fallen branches near the river while the others prepared dinner. The sun was setting earlier now, and the forest grew dark quickly under the thick canopy. "Patricia," Janet said as we loaded our arms with kindling, "I want to tell you something about last night." I stopped and looked at her. In the fading light, her face looked pale and drawn. "I wasn't entirely honest this morning," she continued, "about what happened in my tent." "What do you mean?" "I said something was touching my face, and that was true, but—" She took a shaky breath. "It wasn't just touching me. It was trying to get into my mouth, into my nose, like it was trying to crawl inside me." The kindling in my arms suddenly felt heavy. "Janet, that sounds like—" "A nightmare, I know. That's what I told myself. But Patricia, I was awake. I know I was awake because I could hear Kevin snoring in his tent the whole time. And the smell. God, the smell was so real. Like rotting meat and wet earth and something else. Something sweet and terrible." We stood there in the gathering darkness, the river murmuring beside us like a voice speaking secrets we couldn't understand. "There's something else," Janet whispered. "When it finally stopped and went away, I heard footsteps. But they weren't walking away from my tent. They were walking toward the others. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. Did you tell Marcus? I tried, but he just patted my shoulder and said I was traumatized from the nightmare. He thinks I'm a hysterical woman who can't handle camping. I believed her. Standing there in the growing darkness, surrounded by ancient trees and the constant whisper of running water, I believed every word. We returned to camp with our firewood and tried to act normal, but I found myself watching the others closely. Marcus seemed the same, jovial, confident, taking charge of the group dynamics as he always did at work. Kevin remained nervous, but that wasn't unusual for him. Sarah appeared calm, though she kept glancing toward the trees as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. The fire caught quickly and soon blazed high, pushing back the darkness and creating a circle of warmth and light. We cooked dinner and opened a bottle of wine Sarah had brought, trying to recapture the easy camaraderie of the previous night. But the conversation felt forced, and we all found ourselves looking over our shoulders at sounds from the forest. Around 10 o'clock, Kevin announced he was turning in early. "Big day of hiking tomorrow," he said, though we hadn't discussed any specific plans. He seemed eager to retreat to his tent, and I noticed he'd positioned his sleeping bag so he could see the entrance flap from where he lay. Sarah followed soon after, claiming exhaustion from the day's walk. That left Marcus, Janet, and me around the fire, watching sparks spiral up into the star-filled sky. "So, what's really going on?" Marcus asked once the others were presumably asleep. "You two have been jumpy all day." Janet looked at me and I nodded encouragingly. She told Marcus about the previous night, including the details she'd shared with me by the river. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing more skeptical with each word. "Look," he said when she finished, "I understand that camping can be stressful if you're not used to it. The darkness, the isolation, the unfamiliar sounds, they can play tricks on your mind. But Janet, you're talking about something that's physically impossible." "I know how it sounds," Janet said, "but I also know what I experienced." "What you dreamed you experienced," Marcus corrected gently. "There's a difference." I started to defend Janet, but Marcus held up a hand. "I'm not trying to dismiss your feelings," he said, "but let's think logically. We're in a state forest. The most dangerous thing we're likely to encounter is a black bear, and they're usually more afraid of us than we are of them. There are no large predators in Maryland. No wolves, no mountain lions, and certainly no whatever you think was in your tent." Janet's jaw tightened. "So you think I'm making it up? I think you had a very vivid nightmare brought on by sleeping in an unfamiliar environment. It happens to a lot of people their first time camping." The conversation might have continued, but a scream cut through the night air like a blade. High-pitched, agonized, and definitely human. It came from the direction of Kevin's tent. We all jumped to our feet, Marcus grabbing a flashlight. The screaming stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving only the sound of the river and our own ragged breathing. "Kevin!" Marcus called out. No answer. We approached his tent cautiously, Marcus leading with the flashlight beam dancing ahead of us. The tent looked normal from the outside, no tears, no signs of struggle. But when Marcus shone the light through the mesh entrance, we could see Kevin's sleeping bag was empty. "Kevin," Janet called softly. A rustling sound came from inside the tent, and then Kevin's voice, muffled and strange. "I'm okay. Just had a bad dream. Go back to sleep." Marcus relaxed visibly. "You sure you're all right, buddy?" "Yeah, just give me a minute." We returned to the fire, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Kevin's voice had sounded odd, flatter than usual, with a strange cadence that didn't match his normal speech patterns. "See?" Marcus said, settling back into his camp chair. "Bad dreams. Happens to everyone out here." But Janet was staring at Kevin's tent with a frown. "Marcus," she said slowly, "shine your flashlight over there again." "Why?" "Just do it." Marcus sighed and aimed the beam at Kevin's tent. Through the mesh, we could see a silhouette sitting upright in the sleeping bag. "He's just sitting there," Janet whispered, "not moving at all." We watched for several minutes. The silhouette remained perfectly still, not even the slight movement you'd expect from someone breathing. "Maybe he fell asleep sitting up," Marcus suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Kevin," I called softly. The silhouette didn't respond, didn't even turn toward the sound of my voice. A terrible thought occurred to me. When was the last time any of us actually saw Kevin today? I mean, really saw him up close? Marcus and Janet exchanged glances. We'd all been together during the hike, but now that I thought about it, Kevin had stayed at the back of the group most of the day. During lunch at the bone site, he'd remained on the edge of our little circle. At dinner, he'd sat with his back to the fire, his face in shadow. He was acting weird at dinner, Janet said quietly. Barely ate anything. And when Sarah asked him about his poetry, he just stared at her for the longest time before answering. A chill ran through me as I remembered the moment. Kevin had looked at Sarah with an expression I couldn't quite read, not confused exactly, but as if he was trying to remember something important he'd forgotten. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, standing up. "I'm going to check on him." "Marcus, don't—" Janet started, but he was already walking toward Kevin's tent, flashlight in hand. We watched as he stopped outside the entrance and called Kevin's name. The silhouette inside didn't move. Marcus unzipped the tent flap and shined his light inside. The beam illuminated Kevin sitting cross-legged in his sleeping bag, staring straight ahead with unblinking eyes. His mouth hung open slightly, and his skin looked waxy and pale in the artificial light. "Kevin?" Marcus said, his voice now edged with concern. Kevin's head turned toward Marcus with a mechanical, jerky movement that looked wrong. When he spoke, his voice carried the same flat cadence we'd heard earlier. "I'm fine. Go away." Marcus backed away from the tent, his face troubled. "Something's not right," he admitted as he rejoined us by the fire. "We need to leave," Janet said. "Right now, pack up and drive back to town." "In the middle of the night?" Marcus shook his head. "The roads are too dangerous. We could get lost or have an accident. So we just sit here and pretend everything's normal while Kevin acts like some kind of zombie?" Before Marcus could answer, we heard Sarah scream. This time, we all ran toward the sound without hesitation. Sarah's tent was shaking violently, as if something large was thrashing around inside. We could hear her voice, high and panicked, but couldn't make out the words over the sound of ripping fabric. Marcus reached the tent first and yanked open the zipper. Sarah tumbled out, gasping and wild-eyed, her sleeping bag tangled around her legs. Deep scratches marked her arms and face, bleeding freely in the flashlight beam. "It was in my tent," she gasped. "Something was in there with me." "What kind of something?" I asked, helping her untangle herself from the sleeping bag. "I don't know. I couldn't see it clearly. But it was cold, so cold, and it kept trying to touch my face. Its fingers felt like ice and meat at the same time." Janet and I exchanged a meaningful look, the same thing that had visited Janet the night before. "Did you see what it looked like?" Marcus asked. Sarah shook her head. "Too dark, but I could smell it. Rotting meat and something sweet, and when it breathed, the air got so cold I could see my breath." We examined her tent with our flashlights. The back wall had 3 parallel tiers running from top to bottom, as if made by enormous claws. The edges of the fabric looked burned or frostbitten, brittle and discolored. "What the hell could do that?" Marcus muttered. A sound from behind us made us all turn. Kevin was standing outside his tent, silhouetted against the dying fire. He stood perfectly still, watching us with that same unblinking stare. "Kevin!" I called. He didn't respond, just continued to watch us with those motionless eyes. "This is fucked up," Sarah whispered. "We need to get out of here. Now." Marcus finally nodded. "Okay, let's pack up quickly and drive back to civilization. We can sort this out in town." We moved fast, stuffing sleeping bags and gear into packs without bothering to fold or organize anything. The whole time, Kevin watched us from his position by the fire. He didn't help with the packing, didn't speak, didn't even blink that I could see. "Kevin, we're leaving," Marcus called to him. "Get your stuff together." Kevin turned his head toward Marcus with that same mechanical movement. "I'm not going anywhere." "The hell you're not. Something's happening here that I don't understand. But we're all leaving together." "No." Kevin's voice carried no emotion, no inflection. "I belong here now." "What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of answering, Kevin smiled. It was the most unnatural expression I'd ever seen on a human face. Too wide, too knowing, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. "Fuck this," Sarah said, shouldering her pack. "I'm walking to the cars, with or without him." We left Kevin standing by the fire and made our way along the dark trail toward the parking area where we'd left our vehicles. Marcus led with the flashlight, followed by Sarah, then Janet, with me bringing up the rear. The forest pressed close around us, and every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. We'd gone maybe half a mile when Marcus stopped suddenly. "The trail," he said. "It's not going the right way." I moved up beside him and looked ahead. The path we were following curved away to the left, but I remembered the trail to the parking area being relatively straight. "Maybe we missed a turn," Janet suggested. Marcus consulted his compass, frowning. "According to this, we're heading northeast. The parking area should be due south." "Let me see that," Sarah said, taking the compass. After a moment, she shook her head. "This thing's spinning like crazy, magnetic interference or something." We tried using our phone's GPS, but none of them could get a signal. The mapping apps showed our location as a blank gray area with no roads or landmarks marked. "We'll backtrack to camp and wait for daylight," Marcus decided. "Try to get our bearings then." But when we turned around, the trail behind us had changed. Instead of the clear path we'd followed from camp, we faced a tangle of thick underbrush and fallen logs that looked impassable in the darkness. "This isn't right," Janet whispered. "The trail was clear 5 minutes ago." A sound echoed through the forest. Laughter, high and wild and definitely not human. It seemed to come from all directions at once, surrounding us in the darkness. Sarah grabbed my arm. "What the fuck was that?" Before anyone could answer, we heard Kevin's voice calling from somewhere ahead of us on the trail. "Where are you going? Don't you want to stay and play?" But Kevin was back at camp. We'd left him standing by the fire. "How did he get ahead of us?" Marcus asked. Another sound answered him. Footsteps crashing through the underbrush, coming toward us fast. Too fast for a human being to move through the thick forest. "Run," Sarah said. We ran, abandoning our packs and fleeing blindly through the dark woods. Branches tore at our clothes and faces. Roots caught our feet, sending us stumbling and sprawling. Behind us, the footsteps kept pace easily, sometimes seeming to come from one direction, sometimes another. Kevin's voice followed us, calling out in that flat, emotionless tone, "You can't leave. This is where you belong now. This is where you'll always belong." We burst into a small clearing and stopped, gasping for breath. The silver moon cast enough light for us to see each other's terrified faces. "Which way?" Marcus panted. None of us knew. Every direction looked the same, dark trees and impenetrable shadows. A branch snapped somewhere behind us, and Kevin walked into the clearing. But something was terribly wrong with the way he moved. His limbs bent at odd angles, as if his joints no longer worked properly. His head tilted too far to one side, and when he smiled, his mouth opened wider than any human mouth should. "Found you," he said in that awful flat voice. Sarah backed away, tears streaming down her face. "Kevin, what happened to you?" "Kevin's gone," the thing wearing Kevin's face replied. "I'm wearing him now. He fits pretty well, don't you think?" It took a step toward us, and I could see that its feet weren't quite touching the ground. It floated just above the forest floor, swaying slightly like something hanging from invisible strings. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, though his voice shook with terror. "I live here," it said. "In the deep places, in the dark places. I've been so hungry and so lonely, but now I have Kevin to keep me company, and soon I'll have all of you." Janet screamed and ran toward the trees. The Kevin thing turned its head to watch her go, the movement accompanied by a sound like breaking bones. "Let her go," it said. "She can't leave anyway. None of you can. The forest won't let you." It was right. We'd discovered that already. The trails led nowhere but deeper into the woods. Our compasses spun uselessly. Our phones couldn't find signals or map our location. "What do you want?" I asked. The thing smiled with Kevin's mouth. To not be alone anymore. To have friends who will stay with me forever. Kevin understands now. He's happy here. You will be too, once you let me in. Let you in where? Into your skin. Into your thoughts. Into your dreams. It took another floating step toward us. It doesn't hurt much. Kevin barely struggled at all. Sarah bolted in the opposite direction from Janet. The Kevin thing watched her go with amusement. Running just makes it take longer, it called after her. But I don't mind. I like games. That left Marcus and me alone in the clearing with the creature wearing our colleague's face. This isn't real, Marcus said, but he was backing away as he spoke. This is some kind of shared hallucination. Carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty camp stove or something. The Kevin thing laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. Tell yourself whatever helps you sleep at night, Marcus, though you won't be sleeping much longer. It lunged toward him with inhuman speed. Marcus tried to run, but tendrils of shadow seemed to reach out from the creature and wrap around his legs, sending him crashing to the ground. I heard him scream once before the shadows covered his face. I ran, blindly, desperately, crashing through the underbrush without any idea where I was going. Branches whipped across my face and thorns tore at my clothes, but I kept running. Behind me, I could hear the creature calling my name in Marcus's voice now, pleading with me to come back and help him. I didn't stop running until I collapsed beside a stream, my lungs burning and my legs shaking with exhaustion. The water looked black in the moonlight, flowing over smooth stones that clicked together like teeth. As I knelt there gasping for breath, I heard Janet calling for help somewhere in the distance. Her voice echoed strangely through the forest, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. Then Sarah's voice joined hers, high and terrified, screaming my name. But I didn't trust the voices anymore. The creature could imitate any of us perfectly. I followed the stream, hoping it might lead me back to the river and eventually to some landmark I could recognize. The water moved sluggishly, thick as oil, and had a smell that reminded me of the bones we'd found earlier, old death and sweet corruption. After what felt like hours of stumbling along the stream bank, I saw a light ahead through the trees. My heart leaped with hope until I got close enough to see what it was. Our campfire, still burning exactly as we'd left it. Kevin's tent stood undisturbed, and our abandoned gear lay scattered where we'd dropped it in our haste to leave. I'd been walking in circles. As I stood at the edge of our campsite, afraid to enter but with nowhere else to go, I heard voices from inside Kevin's tent. Familiar voices having a quiet conversation. "She'll come back eventually," Marcus said. "She has nowhere else to go." "The forest won't let her leave," Janet agreed, "just like it wouldn't let us." "I'm getting hungry again," Sarah added. "When she comes back, can I have her first?" Kevin's voice answered, "We'll share her. There's enough for everyone." They laughed together, a sound like wind through dry leaves. I backed away from the campsite, my heart hammering against my ribs. They were all in there, all my friends and colleagues having a casual conversation about eating me. But they were dead, or worse than dead. The creature had taken them all, was wearing them like masks. A hand touched my shoulder. I spun around and found myself face to face with my own reflection. It looked exactly like me. Same hair, same clothes, same scratches on my face from running through the thorns. But its eyes were different, cold and knowing and absolutely empty of anything human. "Hello, Patricia," it said in my own voice. "I've been waiting for you." "You're not me," I whispered. "Not yet," it agreed, "but I will be soon. I've learned so much from your friends. Kevin taught me about loneliness and fear. Marcus showed me leadership and control. Janet gave me her memories of childhood and loss. And Sarah had such beautiful dreams of home and family." It smiled with my face, and I realized this was what had happened to all of them. The creature hadn't just killed them. It had consumed them completely, taking their memories and personalities and wearing them like clothing. "What are you?" I asked. "I'm what's left when everything else goes away," it said. I'm the hunger in the dark places, the whisper in the wind, the thing that watches from the shadows. I've been here since before your kind learned to make fire. I'll be here long after you're gone. Why us? Why did you choose us? I didn't choose you. You chose me when you came to my forest, built your fires on my soil, filled the air with your laughter and voices. You called to me with your warmth and life and dreams. Its smile widened, and I was so very lonely. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The creature wearing my face reached out and touched my cheek with fingers that felt like ice and rotten meat. Don't fight it, it whispered. Your friends didn't fight at the end. They understood that this is better than being alone. We'll all be together forever now, deep in the dark places where no one will ever find us. I felt something cold seeping into my skin where it touched me, spreading through my body like poison. My vision began to blur, and I could hear my own voice speaking words I wasn't choosing to say. I want to stay, my voice said. I want to be with my friends. Of course you do, the creature replied. That's what friends are for. The cold spread further, reaching my chest, my heart, my thoughts. I felt myself beginning to slip away, my memories and personality dissolving like sugar in water. In a few more moments, there would be nothing left of Patricia Johnson except another mask for the creature to wear. But as the transformation began, I remembered something Janet had whispered to me by the river. It was trying to crawl inside me. She'd fought it off somehow, at least that first night. If she could resist it, maybe I could too. I focused on my strongest memory, not of work or stress or everyday concerns, but of my sister's wedding 3 years ago. The joy on her face as she walked down the aisle, the way the sunlight streamed through the church windows, the feeling of being surrounded by people who loved each other, who belonged together by choice rather than hunger. The creature recoiled slightly, its grip on my face loosening. Interesting, it said. You're stronger than the others, but it won't matter. I have all the time in the world, and you're trapped here with me. It was right. Even if I could resist the creature's influence, I was still lost in a forest that seemed to shift and change to prevent escape. My friends were gone, consumed by something ancient and hungry. I was alone with a being that fed on human souls. But I wasn't ready to give up. I grabbed a burning branch from our campfire and swung it at the creature wearing my face. It shrieked and stumbled backward, its form wavering like heat mirage. For a moment, I could see through its disguise to what lay beneath, something pale and writhing with too many joints and eyes that reflected light like a spider's. Fire hurts you, I said, brandishing the burning branch. Everything hurts me, it replied, its voice distorting. That's why I need friends. Why I need you. I backed toward the river, keeping the fire between us. The creature followed, but slowly, cautiously. It seemed genuinely afraid of the flames. Your friends are still alive, it said as we moved through the forest. Inside me. I can let you talk to them. Kevin's voice emerged from its throat. Patricia, please, it's not so bad here. We're all together. We're happy. Then Marcus, don't leave us alone with this thing. It gets so lonely when it doesn't have anyone to talk to. Janet's voice. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth from the beginning, but it's too late now. Just let it happen. Finally, Sarah, sounding exactly as she had in life. It hurts to resist, Patricia. It's so much easier to just let go. I knew the voices weren't real, just the creature using my friend's memories against me. But hearing them speak, even knowing they were gone, broke something inside me. I reached the river and stopped at its edge. The water moved fast here, white with foam as it tumbled over rocks and fallen logs. Even in daylight, it would be dangerous to cross. In darkness, it was probably suicide. The creature approached slowly, no longer wearing my face. Its true form flickered in and out of visibility, sometimes human-shaped, sometimes something else entirely. The burning branch in my hands was getting shorter, the flames beginning to weaken. There's nowhere to run, it said in a voice like rustling leaves. The forest is mine. The water is mine. The very air you breathe belongs to me now. It was probably right, but I'd rather die as myself than live as its puppet. I threw the burning branch at the creature and dove into the river. The water was shockingly cold, so cold it felt like knives against my skin. The current grabbed me immediately, slamming me against rocks and dragging me under. I fought to keep my head above the surface, swallowing mouthfuls of icy water that tasted of mud and decay. Behind me, I could hear the creature screaming in voices I recognized, my friends calling my name, begging me to come back, promising they would take care of me forever. I let the river carry me downstream, no longer fighting the current but trying to steer myself away from the largest rocks. My body was going numb from the cold, and I knew I didn't have long before hypothermia set in. But anything was better than what waited for me back in the forest. The river curved sharply, and I caught a glimpse of lights ahead, electric lights, artificial and beautiful. A bridge crossed the water, and beyond it I could see the shapes of buildings. Civilization. I'd found my way back to the world of the living. The current carried me under the bridge and into shallower water where I could finally touch bottom. I dragged myself up onto a muddy bank, gasping and shivering violently. My clothes were soaked and torn, my body covered in bruises and cuts from the rocks. But I was alive, and I was free. A state trooper found me an hour later, wandering along Route 135 in a hypothermic daze. I tried to tell him about my friends, about the creature in the forest, about everything that had happened. He wrapped me in a blanket and radioed for an ambulance, treating me like a victim of exposure and shock. The search teams found our campsite the next day. Everything was exactly as we'd left it: tents, sleeping bags, gear scattered around a cold fire pit. But there was no sign of Marcus, Kevin, Janet, or Sarah. No footprints, no blood, no indication of what had happened to them. The official report listed them as missing, presumed dead in a wilderness accident. The theory was that they'd become lost in the dark and succumbed to exposure or injury. I was the sole survivor, found suffering from severe hypothermia and trauma-induced hallucinations. Nobody believed my account of what really happened. The doctors spoke of survivors' guilt and post-traumatic stress. My family urged me to seek counseling. My employers were understanding but distant, treating me like someone who'd had a complete psychological breakdown. Maybe they were right. Maybe I did imagine the whole thing. Maybe the stress of our situation, combined with fear and exhaustion, created elaborate hallucinations that felt completely real. But 6 months later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a digital camera, Kevin's camera, which I remembered him using to take pictures during our hike on Saturday. The memory card contained dozens of photos from our camping trip, including several from that final night around the campfire. In the last photo, taken just before Kevin went to his tent, I could see something standing at the edge of the firelight. A pale figure that wasn't quite human, with limbs that bent wrong and eyes that reflected the camera flash like an animal's. It was reaching toward Kevin with fingers that were too long, too thin, and in the corner of the photo, barely visible in the shadows, were 3 more figures: Marcus, Janet, and Sarah, but wrong somehow. Their faces slack and empty, their eyes black holes in the darkness. The timestamp on the photo was 11:47 p.m. on Saturday night. According to my memory, that was hours before anything strange began happening, which meant the creature had been watching us, choosing us, preparing to take us from the very beginning of our trip. I burned the photos immediately, but I kept the camera. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I turn it on and scroll through the empty memory, just to remind myself that I'm not crazy, that what happened in the Savage River State Forest was real. I quit my job at the accounting firm a week later. I couldn't stand being around the empty desks where my friends used to sit, couldn't bear the way people looked at me with pity and suspicion. I moved across the country to Oregon, as far from Maryland as I could get. But distance doesn't matter. Not really. Because sometimes, when I'm hiking alone in the mountains or camping by myself beside a remote lake, I hear familiar voices calling my name from the darkness. Marcus telling me about quarterly reports, Kevin reciting one of his poems, Janet laughing at something funny, Sarah describing her childhood in Arizona. They sound exactly as they did in life, warm and friendly and perfectly normal. They tell me they've been looking for me, that they miss me, that they want me to come back and be with them forever. I never answer. I pack up my gear and drive away as fast as I can, putting miles between myself and whatever is wearing my friends' voices like masks. But I know that someday the creature will find me again. It's patient and persistent, and it remembers every detail of our lives together. It knows exactly how to sound like the people I loved, exactly what to say to make me want to join them in the deep, dark places where it keeps its collection of stolen souls. And I'm getting tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of carrying the weight of what happened to my friends. Sometimes I think it might not be so bad, letting the creature take me too. At least then I'd be with Marcus and Kevin and Janet and Sarah again. At least then I wouldn't have to spend every night wondering if the voices I hear in the wind are real or just echoes of my guilt and grief. But then I remember the way Kevin looked at us with those empty, knowing eyes. I remember the mechanical way his head turned, the unnatural width of his smile, the flat, emotionless tone of his voice. Whatever was wearing Kevin's body, it wasn't Kevin anymore. It was just a hungry thing pretending to be human, and if I let it take me, I'll become just another mask for it to wear, another voice for it to use to lure other victims into the forest. I'll spend eternity helping it hunt and feed and grow stronger. So I keep running. I keep moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to form new friendships or attachments. Because the creature feeds on connection, on the bonds between people who care about each other. As long as I remain alone, as long as I don't let anyone get close to me, it can't use them against me. It's not much of a life, but it's the only way I know to keep fighting, to keep the creature from adding more voices to its collection. My name is Patricia Johnson, and I am 34 years old. I survived something that should have killed me, something that consumed my friends and colleagues and left me as the only witness to their fate. This happened in the Savage River State Forest in western Maryland, in a place where ancient things still hunt in the darkness between the trees. The forest looks normal on maps and satellite photos. Hikers and campers visit it every year without incident. But deep in the woods, in the places where the trails don't go and the sunlight never reaches, something waits. Something that's always hungry. Something that's always alone. And if you're reading this, if you're planning your own camping trip to a remote forest or mountain wilderness, remember what happened to us. Remember that some places belong to older things than humanity, things that see us not as people, but as potential vessels for their endless appetite. Stay on the marked trails. Don't camp alone. Keep your fires burning bright. And if someone you know starts acting strange, if they speak in flat, emotionless tones or move in ways that seem wrong, don't try to help them. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can, and don't look back. Because once the creature has your scent, once it knows your face and voice and dreams, it will never stop hunting you. It will follow you across continents and decades, wearing the faces of everyone you've ever loved, calling your name in voices that break your heart with their perfect mimicry of human warmth. And eventually, when you're tired and old and have nowhere left to run, it will find you. Just like it found us in the Savage River State Forest on a cold October night when the moon was dark and the ancient things stirred in their deep places beneath the earth. Just like it's still looking for me now. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of Garrett County, Maryland, near the Savage River State Forest, where the mountains press close and cell towers are a luxury the government never bothered to install. I should have listened to the ranger at the Deep Creek Lake Visitor Center when he mentioned the missing hikers. 3 separate incidents over the past 2 months, he'd said, all along the Blackwater Ridge Trail that connects to the old logging roads near Cranesville Swamp. But Sarah Rodriguez, my college roommate and hiking partner, had been planning this weekend for months, and I wasn't about to let some local gossip ruin our first real adventure since graduation. "It's probably just people getting lost," Sarah had said as we loaded our packs into her Subaru. "City folks who don't know how to read a map." I wish now that we'd been those kinds of people. The drive from Baltimore took us 4 hours, winding through increasingly narrow roads until we reached the trailhead parking area. Nothing more than a gravel clearing carved out of the forest. Only one other vehicle sat there, a rusted pickup truck with Pennsylvania plates and a broken taillight. Sarah parked as far from it as possible. "Creepy," she muttered, adjusting her new hiking boots. Sarah had always been the cautious one, which made her enthusiasm for this trip all the more surprising. She'd bought top-of-the-line gear, studied topographic maps for weeks, even taken a wilderness first aid course. But probably just some local hunter. The forest swallowed us within 50 yards of the trailhead. Western Maryland's mountains aren't the towering peaks you see in Colorado or Montana, but they're old, ancient, rolling hills covered in dense hardwood forests that seem to absorb sound and light with equal hunger. The trail itself was well marked initially, with fresh blazes on the oak and maple trees, but as we climbed higher, the marks became sporadic, faded. According to the map, we should hit the ridge in about 2 miles, Sarah said, consulting her GPS device. The screen flickered, showing our location as a pulsing blue dot surrounded by green terrain. Then it's another 3 miles along the ridge to the campsite near Blackwater Falls. The name should have been a warning. We'd been hiking for an hour when I first noticed the silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of nature. This was something else, an oppressive absence of sound that made my ears ring. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no insects buzzing. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "Sarah," I said, stopping on the trail. "Do you hear that?" She paused ahead of me, tilting her head. "Hear what?" "Nothing. That's the problem." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're being paranoid. It's just quiet. That's what we came for, right? To get away from the city noise." But as we continued climbing, the silence followed us like a living thing. I found myself speaking louder than necessary, just to prove sound could still exist in this place. Sarah stopped responding to my comments about the scenery, her attention fixed on her GPS device. "Jen," she said finally, her voice tight, "this thing is acting weird." I looked over her shoulder at the screen. Our blue dot was still there, but the trail we'd been following had vanished from the digital map. According to the GPS, we were standing in the middle of unmarked wilderness, miles from any established path. "Must be a glitch," I said, though my stomach was already knotting with unease. "These things don't work well under heavy tree cover." Sarah shook the device, as if that might fix whatever was wrong. The screen flickered, went black, then showed a completely different view, one where we appeared to be standing in water, surrounded by symbols that looked nothing like standard topographic markers. "What the hell?" Sarah pressed the power button, but the device wouldn't turn off. The screen continued displaying that impossible view, showing us submerged in what looked like a vast swamp, dotted with structures that resembled crosses? Graves? I grabbed the GPS from her hands and tried the reset button. Nothing. The device felt warm, almost hot against my palm. Without thinking, I hurled it into the forest. It struck a tree trunk and shattered, pieces of plastic and circuitry scattering across the forest floor. "Jen! What the fuck? That cost me $300. "Something was wrong with it," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded inadequate. The truth was, looking at that screen had filled me with a dread so profound I couldn't bear to hold the device another second. Sarah stared at the broken pieces, her face flushed with anger. "Great. Now how are we supposed to navigate?" I pulled out my phone, though I already knew what I'd find. No signal. The battery indicator showed full charge, but when I tried to access the map app, The phone simply froze. The screen went dark, then lit up again, showing the time as 3:33 a.m. Impossible, since it was clearly mid-afternoon. "Mine's doing the same thing," Sarah said, looking at her own device. "Time says midnight, but the sun's still up." We looked at each other in the filtered sunlight streaming through the canopy, both of us thinking the same thing but neither wanting to say it out loud. Something was very wrong here. "We have a paper map," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "and a compass. We'll be fine." But when Sarah opened her pack to retrieve the folded topographic map we'd studied so carefully that morning, the paper was blank, not weathered or faded, completely white, as if it had never been printed on at all. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered, turning the empty paper over in her hands. I was looking at this in the car. It had all the trails marked, the elevation lines, everything. I checked my own backup map, also blank. The forest around us seemed to press closer, the trees leaning inward as if they were listening to our conversation. The silence had become so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat, Sarah's shallow breathing, the rustle of fabric when either of us moved. "We go back," I said. "Right now. We follow the trail back to the car and get out of here." But when we turned around, there was no trail behind us. The forest floor was covered in unmarked leaves and fallen branches, with no sign that anyone had ever passed this way. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no blazes on the trees to guide us home. Sarah's breathing became rapid, shallow. "This can't be happening. Trails don't just disappear." I took her hand, as much to comfort myself as her. Her skin was cold, clammy. "We'll pick a direction and stick to it. Downhill, toward the valley. We'll find a stream and follow it out." We started walking, though without any landmarks or trail markers, I couldn't be sure we were maintaining a straight line. The forest all looked the same, endless repetitions of oak, maple, and pine, carpeted with dead leaves that muffled our footsteps. The canopy above seemed to grow thicker as we walked, blocking out more and more sunlight until the forest took on a perpetual twilight atmosphere. After what felt like hours but could have been minutes, time had become meaningless in this place. We came to a clearing. In the center stood a single structure, a hunting cabin, maybe 20 feet square, built from logs that had gone gray with age. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney and warm yellow light glowed in the windows. "Thank God," Sarah breathed. "Someone's here. They can help us." But I held back, something primitive in my brain screaming warnings. The cabin looked wrong somehow, though I couldn't articulate why. Maybe it was too perfect, too much like a postcard image of rustic mountain life. Or maybe it was the way the smoke rose straight up without any wind to disturb it, despite the breeze I could feel on my face. "Sarah, wait." But she was already walking toward the cabin, drawn by the promise of help and shelter. I followed reluctantly, every step feeling like a betrayal of my instincts. The door opened before we reached it. The man who emerged was tall and thin, with shoulder-length gray hair and a beard that reached his chest. He wore flannel and denim, clothes that had seen better decades. His smile was wide and welcoming, showing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "Well, hello there, girls," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. "You look lost." "We are," Sarah said immediately. "Our GPS stopped working, and our maps. Something's wrong with them. Can you help us get back to the trailhead?" The man's smile widened. Of course, but it's getting dark, and these woods can be dangerous at night. Why don't you come in? Warm up by the fire? My name's Ezekiel, by the way. Ezekiel Thorne." I wanted to refuse, to grab Sarah and run back into the forest, but the rational part of my mind pointed out that we were genuinely lost. It was getting dark, and we had no idea which direction to go. The cabin represented shelter and possibly guidance back to civilization. "That's very kind," I said carefully. "I'm Jennifer, and this is Sarah." "Lovely names," Ezekiel said, stepping aside to let us enter. both biblical. I appreciate biblical names. The inside of the cabin was exactly what you'd expect. Rustic furniture, a stone fireplace with a healthy blaze, oil lamps providing warm light, shelves lined with canned goods and hunting trophies. But there were details that made my skin crawl. The deer heads on the walls all faced the same direction, toward the door, as if watching whoever entered. The books on the shelves had no titles on their spines, just blank leather bindings. And there was a smell underneath the wood, smoke and kerosene, something organic and unpleasant that reminded me of meat left too long in the sun. "Sit, sit," Ezekiel said, gesturing to a couch positioned in front of the fire. "I'll make some coffee. You must be tired from all that walking." Sarah collapsed onto the couch with obvious relief, but I remained standing, examining the cabin's interior. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace sat a collection of small objects: stones, pieces of bone, what looked like dried herbs tied with string. Occult symbols were carved into the wooden beams overhead, symbols I didn't recognize but that filled me with unease. "This is a beautiful place," Sarah said as Ezekiel busied himself at a wood-burning stove. "Do you live here year-round?" "Oh, yes," he replied without turning around. "Been here longer than most folks can remember. This land and I, we understand each other." Something about the way he said "this land" made me step closer to Sarah. The fire in the fireplace had begun to change color, shifting from normal orange flames to something with a greenish tint. The light it cast made everything in the cabin look sickly, unnatural. "Mr. Thorne," I said, "we really just need directions back to the parking area. We have supplies in our car and people are expecting us." "Expecting you?" He turned around, and I saw that his too perfect smile had vanished. His eyes, which had seemed friendly in the doorway, now looked black in the green firelight. "No one's expecting you, Jennifer. No one even knows you're here." Sarah looked confused. "What do you mean? Of course people know we're here. We told—" She stopped, her face going pale. "We told— Who did we tell?" I tried to remember. We'd planned this trip for weeks, bought supplies, studied maps. Surely we'd mentioned it to someone. Friends, family, co-workers. But as I searched my memory, I found only blank spaces where those conversations should have been. "We told my roommate," I said, though even as the words left my mouth I wasn't sure they were true. "And Sarah's boyfriend. They know where we went." Ezekiel laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Do you even remember their names?" The horrible truth was, I couldn't. I could picture faces, fragments of conversations, but names and specific details slipped away like water through my fingers. Sarah's boyfriend, tall, dark hair, worked in— What did he work in? Sarah's face showed the same dawning horror as she struggled with the same impossible blank spaces in her memory. "What's happening to us?" Sarah whispered. "You're home," Ezekiel said simply. "This is where you belong now." The fire flared higher, and in its green light I saw that the hunting trophies on the walls weren't deer at all. The shapes were wrong, the proportions too human. Some of the heads still had hair, long hair, short hair, the unmistakable curve of human ears, human eye sockets. Sarah screamed. Ezekiel moved faster than any human being should be able to move. One moment he was standing by the stove, the next he was behind the couch, his hands on Sarah's shoulders. His fingernails, I noticed with detached horror, were far too long and appeared to be made of something that wasn't keratin. "Don't be afraid," he said in that grinding glass voice. "Fear spoils the meat." I grabbed Sarah's hand and yanked her toward the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door itself seemed to be sealed shut, as if it had grown into the frame. "The windows!" I gasped, but even as I spoke, I could see that they were changing, the glass becoming opaque, then solid wood, until we were trapped in a windowless box with a creature that wore the shape of a man. Ezekiel laughed again. "There's nowhere to go, girls. This forest belongs to me. has belonged to me for longer than your kind has walked upright. Every tree, every stone, every path that leads here, all mine. What do you want? I demanded, placing myself between Sarah and the thing that called itself Ezekiel. What I've always wanted, he replied. What this land requires, sacrifice, blood, the old ways, honored as they should be. The cabin began to change around us. The walls stretched upward, becoming impossibly tall, while the floor remained the same size, creating a vertical tube that extended up into darkness. The hunting trophies on the walls multiplied, dozens of them, then hundreds, all facing inward, all watching us with empty sockets. Sarah was hyperventilating, making small, whimpering sounds. I could feel my own grip on sanity slipping as the reality of our situation became undeniable. We were trapped in a place that operated by rules that had nothing to do with the natural world, with a creature that fed on human beings and had been doing so for God only knew how long. The missing hikers, I said. You killed them. Killed? Ezekiel tilted his head, considering the word. No, I wouldn't say killed. Transformed, changed, made into something more useful than they were when they stumbled into my forest. He gestured to the walls, and I understood with dawning horror that the trophies weren't just decorations. They were the missing hikers, transformed into grotesque ornaments for this creature's collection. You're going to join them, Ezekiel continued conversationally. But first, you're going to help me with something. You see, I need one of you to go back, to return to your world and bring me more. Never, I said immediately. Oh, but you will, he smiled, that too perfect smile, because the alternative is so much worse than death. The green fire flared again, and in its light I saw Sarah changing. Her skin was becoming pale, translucent, and her eyes were filling with the same black emptiness I'd seen in Ezekiel's. When she spoke, her voice was wrong, too deep, with harmonics that hurt my ears. Jennifer, she said, you should listen to him. I backed away from my best friend, the person I'd known for 6 years, who had helped me through my parents' divorce and held my hair when I was sick with food poisoning and had been the maid of honor at my sister's wedding. The thing wearing Sarah's face smiled, and I saw that her teeth had become pointed, predatory. Sarah's gone, Ezekiel said with satisfaction. But don't worry, she's still in there somewhere, still aware, still screaming. I screamed too. Then, a sound of pure rage and terror that seemed to shake the impossible walls of the cabin. The sound was so raw, so primal, that for a moment the green fire flickered and Ezekiel's smile faltered. Interesting, he murmured. You have some fight in you. Good, that will make this more entertaining. I looked around desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. The poker by the fireplace, if I could reach it, maybe I could do some damage before whatever was going to happen to me happened. But as I lunged for the poker, the thing that had been Sarah moved to intercept me. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. Her hands, when they grabbed my wrists, were cold as winter ground. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, she said in that wrong voice. He's going to change you either way. Fuck you, I snarled and drove my knee up into her solar plexus. Sarah, or the thing wearing her shape, doubled over and I broke free, grabbing the poker from beside the fireplace. The iron bar felt solid and real in my hands, the first real thing I'd touched since entering this place. I swung it at Ezekiel's head with all my strength. The poker passed right through him. He laughed as I stumbled, off balance from the failed attack. Iron doesn't work on me, girl. Neither does silver, or blessed water, or any of the other toys your people use against things that go bump in the night. I'm older than your religions, older than your metals, older than your species. The poker crumbled to rust in my hands. But you're not entirely powerless, Ezekiel continued. I'm going to give you a choice, a real choice, which is more than most of your kind get. The cabin walls began to shift again, and suddenly we were outside, standing in a clearing I didn't recognize. But we weren't alone. There were others here, dozens of them, standing in a perfect circle around us. They all looked human at first glance, but when I looked more closely, I could see the wrongness in each of them. Skin that was too pale or too dark, eyes that reflected light like an animal's, movements that didn't quite sync with human physiology. "My children," Ezekiel said proudly. "Each one was like you once, lost, afraid, desperate, but they chose to serve rather than suffer." "What kind of choice is that?" I demanded. "The only kind that matters," he replied. "Join us willingly and retain some fragment of who you were. Fight me and become nothing but meat and bone to decorate my walls." The circle of transformed humans began to close in, and I realized with growing panic that there really was no escape. Even if I could somehow fight my way through the circle, where would I run? We were in Ezekiel's domain, a place where the normal rules of reality didn't apply, where trails disappeared and maps went blank and time moved according to the whims of an ancient predator. But even as despair washed over me, another part of my mind was working, analyzing what I'd seen and heard. Ezekiel was old, powerful, but he wasn't omnipotent. He needed people to come to him. He couldn't simply pluck victims from the outside world, and he needed them to choose, at least to some degree. That suggested limitations, rules that even he had to follow. "Why?" I asked. "Why do you need us to choose? If you're so powerful, why not just take what you want?" For the first time since we'd entered the cabin, Ezekiel looked genuinely annoyed. Questions, always questions with your kind, as if knowledge could save you. But the fact that he didn't answer immediately told me I was on the right track. There were rules here, ancient laws that governed even creatures like him. The missing hikers, they had chosen to come into his forest, chosen to walk the trails that led to his domain, but he still needed their active participation in their own destruction. "You can't just kill us," I said, understanding flooding through me. "You need us to surrender, to give up. That's why you showed me Sarah changing, to break my will." Ezekiel's perfect smile became a snarl, revealing teeth that were definitely not human. "Clever girl. But cleverness won't save you. Look around. Look at my children. They were all clever once." I did look, and what I saw made my blood freeze. The transformed humans weren't just standing in a circle. They were arranged in a pattern, their positions corresponding to symbols carved into the trees around the clearing. It was a ritual circle, designed to channel and focus power. And Sarah was part of it now, her changed form taking her place in the pattern. But her position was wrong, incomplete. The ritual couldn't proceed until I joined them or was destroyed trying to resist. "You need me alive," I said, "at least until the ritual is complete." "Smart," Ezekiel acknowledged, "but not smart enough. Yes, I need you alive for the next few minutes, but after that—" He shrugged. "Well, let's just say that eternity is a very long time to spend regretting your choices." The circle began to tighten, the transformed humans moving with that same jerky, unnatural gait I'd seen in Sarah. But as they approached, I noticed something else. They were all looking at me, but their eyes held something that wasn't just hunger or malice. There was something else there, something that looked almost like hope. "You can still hear them," I said suddenly. "The people they used to be. They're still in there, still aware, still hoping someone will save them." Ezekiel's expression darkened. "Sentimental nonsense. They are what I made them." But I saw him glance nervously at his transformed servants, and I knew I was right. Whatever process he used to change people, it didn't completely erase who they had been. Some fragment of their original selves remained, trapped and aware. "Sarah," I called out to my friend's transformed body, "I know you're in there. Fight him. Fight this." For just a moment, Sarah's jerky movements faltered. Her black eyes flickered and I saw a flash of brown, her natural eye color. Her mouth opened, and she made a sound that wasn't quite human but carried the echo of pain and desperation. "Enough!" Ezekiel roared, and the green fire that had been contained to the cabin's fireplace now erupted from the ground all around us, turning the clearing into a nightmare landscape of writhing flames. But the fire revealed something else. Symbols carved into the earth itself, a massive ritual circle that encompassed the entire clearing, and at specific points around the circle, I could see objects that didn't belong to the forest. Backpacks, hiking boots, pieces of camping equipment, the belongings of the missing hikers, placed according to some arcane design. Including, I realized with a jolt of recognition, Sarah's distinctive blue backpack, which she'd been wearing when we entered the forest but which had vanished sometime during our ordeal. "When did you take her pack?" I demanded. Ezekiel's smile returned, smug and satisfied. "The moment you entered my domain. Did you think the trail disappeared by accident? That your phone stopped working by chance? I've been guiding you here since you took your first step off the main path." The horrible truth crystallized in my mind. We'd never been lost. We'd been herded, driven toward this clearing like cattle toward slaughter. Every wrong turn, every failed navigation attempt had been orchestrated by the creature that called itself Ezekiel Thorne. But if that was true, then he'd made a mistake. He'd been so focused on getting us here that he hadn't considered what else I might have learned along the way. I thought back to our hike, to the strange silence of the forest, the way the trees seemed to lean inward as if they were listening. But not all the trees, just the ones along our route, the ones that had been guiding us toward this place. The rest of the forest had felt normal, natural, which meant Ezekiel's power had limits. He controlled this clearing, probably a significant area around it, but not the entire forest. Somewhere out there was the real world, the normal world, where trails led to parking lots and cell phones worked and maps showed what they were supposed to show. I just had to reach it. The transformed humans were only a few feet away now, their movements synchronized like dancers in some hellish ballet. Sarah was among them, her face a mask of alien hunger, but I thought I could still see traces of the person she'd been in the way she held her shoulders, the familiar gesture of tucking her hair behind her ear. "I'm going to save you," I whispered, though I wasn't sure she could hear me. "All of you." Then I did something that went against every survival instinct I possessed. I ran straight toward the circle of monsters. They weren't expecting that. Their movements were coordinated to prevent escape, not to stop someone from charging into their midst. I slammed into the nearest transformed human, a man who might have been in his 50s when he was still fully human, and sent him sprawling. The ritual circle was broken. The green fire flickered and died. The symbols carved into the trees began to smolder and fade, and Ezekiel let out a roar of rage that shook the ground beneath our feet. "You don't understand what you've done," he snarled, his human disguise finally slipping completely away. What stood before me now was something that had never been human, tall and gaunt, with skin like bark and eyes like holes burned in parchment. Without the circle, without the binding, they'll all revert at once. The shock will kill them. I looked around the clearing and saw that he was right. The transformed humans were convulsing, their bodies shifting and changing as whatever process had made them into monsters began to reverse itself. Some were screaming, horrible inhuman sounds that spoke of indescribable agony. Sarah was among them, her body contorting as her skin shifted from pale translucence back toward its normal color. Her eyes rolled back in her head, showing only white, and blood began to pour from her nose and ears. "Stop it!" I screamed at Ezekiel. "Help them!" "I can't," he snarled. "The binding is broken. They're dying, and it's your fault." But even as he spoke, I could see that wasn't entirely true. Some of the transformed humans were surviving the reversion, gasping and crying but returning to their original forms. A woman who looked to be in her 30s sat up, her eyes brown and human again, staring around the clearing in confusion and terror. "Where?" she whispered. "Where am I? What happened to me?" "You were taken," I told her, helping her to her feet. But you're free now." More of them were recovering. 5, then 7, then 10 people of various ages, all looking lost and traumatized but undeniably human. The missing hikers, I realized. The ones who had disappeared over the past months, presumed dead. But others weren't so fortunate. The man I'd knocked down to break the circle lay still, his body caught halfway between human and whatever Ezekiel had made him into. A teenage girl who couldn't have been more than 17 convulsed once more and then went limp, her transformation incomplete. And Sarah. My best friend lay curled on her side, breathing but unconscious, her body fully human again but her face slack and empty. When I knelt beside her and checked her pulse, it was steady but weak. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. "The mind takes longer to heal than the body," Ezekiel said, his voice now weak and strained. Without the ritual circle, his power was diminished, but he wasn't gone. "Some of them will never fully recover. The things they experienced, the things they were forced to do, the human psyche isn't designed to cope with such trauma." "You're lying," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "Am I?" He gestured to the survivors who were huddled together at the edge of the clearing, all of them staring with hollow, traumatized eyes. "Look at them. Really look. Do they seem whole to you?" They didn't. Even the ones who appeared to have recovered completely moved like sleepwalkers, their expressions vacant and lost. The woman I'd helped stand was rocking back and forth, muttering something under her breath in a language I didn't recognize. "What did you do to them?" I demanded. "I showed them the truth," Ezekiel replied. "The reality that lies beneath your comfortable illusions, the hunger that drives all life, the violence that underlies all existence. Some minds can't accept that truth and retreat into madness rather than face it." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that human beings were stronger than he believed, but the evidence was right in front of me. These people had been freed from their physical transformation, but they were still prisoners of whatever psychological trauma Ezekiel had inflicted on them. "There is one way to help them," he said, his voice taking on a persuasive tone that made my skin crawl. "The binding can be restored. The circle can be rebuilt. Their minds can be cushioned against the trauma. They'll lose their humanity, yes, but they'll also lose their pain." "No," I said immediately. "Think about it," he pressed. "Look at your friend. Is this really living? Wouldn't it be kinder to let her forget? To let all of them forget?" I looked down at Sarah, at her empty eyes and slack expression, and felt my resolve waver. This wasn't the person I'd known. This was a shell, a broken remnant of who she'd been. Maybe Ezekiel was right. Maybe the kindest thing would be to let him complete what he'd started. Then Sarah blinked. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but for just a moment her eyes focused on my face. Her lips moved, forming a single, silent word. "Run." She was still in there. Damaged, traumatized, maybe permanently changed, but still fighting. Still Sarah. "No deal," I told Ezekiel, his inhuman features twisted with rage. "Then you'll watch them suffer. You'll watch them waste away, haunted by memories they can't escape, tormented by experiences no human mind should have to endure. And you'll know that you could have prevented it." Maybe that was true. Maybe I was condemning these people to a lifetime of psychological torment, but I was also giving them a chance. The possibility, however slim, that they might heal, that they might find a way to live with what had been done to them. It was the only choice I could make. "How do we get out of here?" I asked the surviving hikers. Most of them just stared at me blankly, but the woman I'd helped stand earlier seemed to focus with effort. The old logging road," she whispered. "Follow the stream. It leads to the old logging road." "What stream?" I looked around the clearing but saw no water. She pointed with a shaking hand toward what looked like empty forest. But as I stared at the spot she indicated, I began to hear it. the faint sound of running water almost too quiet to detect. "You can't escape me," Ezekiel said, but his voice was weaker now, more distant. "This is my domain. These woods belong to me." "Not all of them," I said, remembering my earlier realization. "Just this part, the part where you've spread your influence. But there are still places where the normal rules apply." I helped Sarah to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed unsteadily. The other survivors gathered around us, moving like people in a dream but responding to direction. "Follow the stream," I told them. "Stay together. Don't stop moving." As we stumbled through the forest, following the barely audible sound of water, I could hear Ezekiel behind us, his voice growing fainter with distance, but still carrying threats and promises of doom. The trees around us gradually became less oppressive, the canopy letting in more natural sunlight. The silence that had plagued us since entering the forest gave way to normal woodland sounds: birds calling, insects buzzing, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. We were leaving his domain. The stream, when we finally found it, was barely more than a trickle of water running over mossy stones. But it was real, natural, flowing according to the laws of physics rather than the whims of an ancient predator. We followed it downhill, stumbling over roots and rocks but never stopping, driven by the desperate need to reach safety. I don't know how long we walked. Time had lost all meaning in that place, and it took a while for my internal clock to readjust to the normal world. The sun was setting when we finally saw it, a gravel road cutting through the forest, with tire tracks and guardrails and all the mundane markers of human civilization. The old logging road. We'd made it. 3 of the survivors broke down completely when they saw the road, collapsing to their knees and sobbing with relief. Others just stood there, staring at the gravel surface as if they couldn't believe it was real. Sarah squeezed my hand, the first voluntary action she'd taken since her transformation began to reverse. "Jen," she whispered, her voice hoarse but recognizably her own. Did that really happen?" "Yeah," I said, fighting back tears. "But it's over now. We're safe." A pickup truck rounded the bend in the road, not the rusted vehicle we'd seen at the trailhead, but a newer Ford with Maryland State Forestry Service logos on the doors. The driver, a middle-aged man in a ranger's uniform, stopped when he saw us. "Jesus Christ," he said, jumping out of the truck. "Are you the missing hikers? We've been searching for you people for months." The ranger, his name tag read Collins, immediately radioed for emergency medical assistance and additional search and rescue teams. Within an hour, the old logging road was crowded with ambulances, state police vehicles, and Forest Service trucks. Paramedics checked each of us for injuries while state troopers took preliminary statements. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. Missing trails, blank maps, a creature that fed on human beings. It was the stuff of nightmares, not reality. The state trooper taking my statement, a professional-looking woman named Sergeant Martinez, listened with the patient expression of someone who'd dealt with traumatized witnesses before. "Miss Williams," she said gently, "you and your friend have been missing for 3 days. The other individuals you're with have been missing for periods ranging from 6 weeks to 4 months. It's not uncommon for people who've experienced severe trauma in the wilderness to have difficulty distinguishing between reality and hallucination." 3 days. It felt like we'd been in that place for hours, but 3 days had passed in the real world. I thought about our families, our jobs, the search teams that must have been looking for us. How do you explain 3 missing days to people who live in a world where time moves in straight lines and maps always show the truth? "The man who took us," I said, though I knew it was hopeless. "Ezekiel Thorne. He had a cabin." "Miss Williams, we've searched every structure in a 50-mile radius. There are no occupied cabins in that area of the forest. No one by that name on any property records or hunting licenses." Of course there weren't. Ezekiel existed in the spaces between reality, in the parts of the world that didn't appear on any map. But I could see from Sergeant Martinez's expression that saying so would only convince her I needed psychiatric evaluation. The other survivors weren't much help. Most of them were barely coherent, speaking in fragments about darkness and hunger and things that couldn't exist. The woman who'd known about the logging road, her name was Patricia Johnson, missing for 2 months, kept insisting that we'd been underground, in caves that stretched for miles beneath the forest. Another survivor, a man named Michael Williams, no relation, despite the shared surname, claimed we'd been held in an abandoned mine shaft. All different stories, all equally impossible to verify. Sarah spent 2 days in the hospital under observation. The doctors found evidence of severe dehydration and malnutrition, consistent with being lost in the wilderness for an extended period, but no signs of physical abuse or captivity. Her blood work showed traces of several unidentified plant compounds, hallucinogens, the doctors theorized, possibly from eating wild mushrooms or drinking contaminated water. Shared psychotic episodes aren't uncommon in survival situations, the psychiatrist explained to me when I came to visit. The stress, the hunger, the isolation, they can cause groups of people to experience remarkably similar hallucinations. The mind creates elaborate narratives to explain traumatic experiences. But when I was alone with Sarah, when the doctors and nurses weren't listening, she told me what she remembered. And her memories matched mine exactly. The cabin, the transformation, the ritual circle, Ezekiel's inhuman form revealed in the green firelight. "They think we're crazy," she whispered, staring out the hospital window at the parking lot full of normal cars driven by normal people living normal lives. "Maybe we are," I said. "Maybe it would be easier if we were." But we both knew the truth. What we'd experienced was real. Whatever the evidence suggested, the creature that called itself Ezekiel Thorne was still out there, still hunting, still transforming lost hikers into components of his grotesque collection. The other survivors were released from the hospital over the following weeks, all of them struggling to readjust to normal life. Patricia Johnson moved back in with her sister in Baltimore, but rarely left the house. Michael Williams quit his job as an accountant and became obsessed with researching local folklore and urban legends. A younger man named David Jones started a blog about his experiences, but the posts became increasingly incoherent until his family had him committed for psychiatric treatment. We tried to stay in touch, the survivors. We formed a kind of unofficial support group, meeting once a month at a diner in Cumberland. But as time passed, the group grew smaller. Some people moved away, wanting to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the Maryland wilderness. Others simply stopped coming, unable to cope with the reminders of what we'd experienced. Sarah lasted longer than most. For almost a year, she seemed to be recovering. She went back to work, started dating again, even talked about taking another hiking trip, somewhere far from Maryland, she always added with a nervous laugh. But I could see the strain in her eyes, the way she flinched at unexpected sounds, how she always had to know where the exits were in any room she entered. She killed herself on a Tuesday in October, exactly 13 months after our ordeal in the forest. The note she left was brief. "I can still hear him calling. I can't fight it anymore. I'm sorry." The police ruled it suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. She'd sealed herself in her garage with the car running, a method that suggested careful planning rather than a sudden impulse. The investigation found no signs of foul play, no indication that anyone else had been involved. But I knew better. Ezekiel had promised us that escape was impossible, that his influence would follow us wherever we went. At the time, I'd assumed he was bluffing, trying to break our will to resist. Now I understood that it hadn't been a threat, it had been a prophecy. 3 more of the survivors died over the following year. Michael Williams was found in his apartment, apparently dead from a heart attack, though the autopsy couldn't explain why a healthy 34-year-old man's heart had simply stopped beating. David Jones disappeared during a family camping trip to Shenandoah National Park. His body was never found. Patricia Johnson walked into the Chesapeake Bay one morning and never came back out. Each death was ruled natural, accidental, or suicide. But I knew what was really happening. Ezekiel was calling his lost prizes home one by one, and they were too damaged to resist his summons. I'm writing this account 5 years after our encounter in the Maryland wilderness. Of the 12 people who escaped that clearing, only 3 of us are still alive. The others didn't die in the forest. They died in hospital beds, apartment bedrooms, and suburban garages, killed by an entity that had marked them as his property and was slowly, patiently reclaiming what he considered stolen goods. I know I'm next. I can feel his influence growing stronger, whispering to me in quiet moments, calling me back to the place where reality bends and the old rules still apply. Sometimes I dream of the cabin, of the green fire and the perfect smile that hid rows of predatory teeth. Sometimes I wake up with the taste of wood smoke in my mouth and the sound of grinding glass laughter in my ears. The authorities never found any evidence of Ezekiel Thorne or his forest domain. The official report concluded that we'd experienced a shared traumatic hallucination, brought on by environmental factors and survival stress. The case was closed, filed away in some dusty archive where it will never be seen again. But people are still going missing in the Maryland wilderness. Hikers who venture too far off the established trails, campers who ignore the warnings about remote areas, hunters who follow game trails deeper into the forest than they should. The disappearances are sporadic, spread out over months and years, easy to dismiss as the normal hazards of wilderness recreation. I know better. I know that somewhere in those ancient hills, in a place that exists in the spaces between maps, a creature older than human civilization continues to hunt. It builds its collection one victim at a time, transforming lost souls into decorations for its impossible cabin, feeding on their fear and despair and the slow erosion of everything that makes them human. And I know that someday, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe next year, I'll hear his call clearly enough that I won't be able to resist it anymore. I'll drive back to Garrett County, park at that gravel clearing, and walk into the forest where trails disappear and time moves according to the whims of a hungry god. When that happens, I hope whoever finds this account will understand what really happened to us. I hope they'll take it seriously enough to stay away from the remote areas of the Maryland wilderness, or at least to hike in groups and never venture far from the marked trails. But mostly, I hope that when my time comes, when I can no longer fight the whispers that call me home, I'll have the strength to do what Sarah couldn't, to resist, to run, to break free one more time. Though deep down, in the part of my mind that still remembers the taste of fear and the sound of grinding glass laughter, I know that hope is probably futile. The forest is patient. The hunger is eternal. And Ezekiel Thorne always collects what belongs to him. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I am 33 years old now. If you're reading this, I'm probably already gone, returned to the place where nightmares walk on 2 legs and the old gods still demand their sacrifices. Stay out of the woods. Stay away from Garrett County. And if you ever find yourself on a trail where the blazes suddenly disappear and your phone stops working and the forest falls unnaturally silent, run. Run as fast as you can and don't look back, because some things that are lost should stay lost forever. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote depths of Savage River State Forest in western Maryland, where the Appalachian Mountains swallow civilization whole and spit out only darkness. I should have listened to the park ranger's warning about the recent incidents in the backcountry. Should have paid attention when he lingered too long on the word, his weathered face creased with something that wasn't quite concern, more like pity. But I was running from my own demons then, fresh from a divorce that had gutted me like a caught fish, and the wilderness seemed like the perfect place to piece myself back together. My hiking partner was Jake Thompson, my college roommate and the only person who hadn't taken sides when Rebecca left. Jake was one of those perpetually optimistic guys who saw adventure in every shadow and opportunity in every setback. At 32, he still had that boyish enthusiasm that made him believe everything would work out fine if you just kept moving forward. I envied that about him. even as it occasionally annoyed me. We'd planned a 4-day backpacking trip through the most isolated section of the forest, following the old logging trails that wound deep into the mountains where cell towers couldn't reach and GPS signals went to die. Jake had found the route online, some obscure hiking forum where people shared hidden gems and off-the-beaten-path adventures. The plan was to hike 15 miles in on the first day, set up base camp near Crabtree Falls, then do day hikes from there. The October air was crisp and clean when we started, our breath forming small clouds as we shouldered our packs at the trailhead. The forest was magnificent in its autumn glory. Maples blazing red and orange, oaks turned gold, the whole canopy forming a stained glass ceiling above the narrow trail. For the first few hours, I actually felt something like peace settling into my bones. "This is exactly what you needed, Mike," Jake said as we paused at an overlook. The valley spread out below us like a green and gold carpet. Nothing like the wilderness to put things in perspective. I nodded, breathing in the clean air. Yeah, maybe you're right. But even then, something felt off. The forest was too quiet. We'd been hiking for 3 hours and hadn't seen a single bird, heard nothing but our own footsteps and labored breathing. I mentioned it to Jake, but he just shrugged. Animals probably smell us coming. We're not exactly stealthy. As afternoon faded toward evening, we finally reached the area where we'd planned to make camp. Crabtree Falls was supposed to be just a quarter mile off the main trail, but when we followed the supposed spur trail, it led to nothing but a dry creek bed lined with smooth stones. No waterfall, no water at all. "GPS must be off," Jake said, checking his phone. The screen showed no signal and a location that placed us somewhere in the middle of Pennsylvania. Weird. We backtracked to the main trail and continued deeper into the forest, looking for any decent water source. The sun was getting low, painting the trees in long, dark shadows that seemed to reach for us like fingers. That's when we heard it, the sound of rushing water from somewhere ahead. The creek we found wasn't on any of our maps. It ran swift and clear between moss-covered banks, maybe 20 feet wide and deep enough that we couldn't see the bottom. The sound it made wasn't quite right either, less like normal flowing water and more like whispers, as if the creek was trying to tell us something we couldn't quite understand. "Good enough," Jake said, already dropping his pack. "We'll camp here tonight and figure out where we are in the morning." I wanted to keep looking, find the actual designated camping area, but darkness was coming fast and we needed to set up while we could still see. We found a relatively flat spot about 50 yards from the creek, cleared away the fallen leaves, and pitched our tents. That's when things started going wrong. The fire wouldn't stay lit. We'd get it going, flames dancing cheerfully, and then it would suddenly die to nothing but cold ash, as if someone had dumped water on it. Even stranger, each time we relit it, the flames burned a different color, sometimes the normal yellow-orange, but other times blue or green, or once a deep red that made my skin crawl. "Must be minerals in the wood," Jake said, but his voice had lost some of its usual confidence. We managed to heat up some canned soup over our camp stove and ate mostly in silence, both of us listening to the sounds of the forest around us. And there were sounds. Rustling in the underbrush, the snap of twigs, what sounded like footsteps circling our camp just beyond the reach of our flashlight beams. "Probably just deer," Jake said, but he moved his chair closer to mine. Around midnight, I was awakened by the sound of zippers. Not just one, but multiple zippers being slowly, deliberately opened. The sound was coming from Jake's tent, maybe 10 feet away from mine. I lay there in my sleeping bag, heart hammering, listening to zip after zip after zip. Far more zippers than any camping tent should have. "Jake," I whispered. No response. Just more zipping sounds, and then silence so complete it felt like the forest was holding its breath. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my own tent, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. Jake's tent looked normal from the outside, no holes, no tears, nothing unusual. but when I called his name again, there was still no answer. I walked around to the front of his tent and found the entrance fully zipped shut, but when I opened it and shined my light inside, the tent was empty. Completely empty. His sleeping bag was gone, his backpack was gone, even his spare clothes were missing. It was as if Jake had never been there at all, except for the smell. The tent reeked of something I couldn't identify, sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the cold remains of our fire, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other, calling Jake's name into the darkness. The forest swallowed my voice without even an echo. When dawn finally came, gray and cheerless, I searched the area around our camp but found no footprints, no sign of struggle, nothing to indicate where Jake had gone or how. His tent was still empty, but now it was completely clean inside. No smell. No indication that anyone had ever used it. I was starting to wonder if I was losing my mind. I should have packed up and hiked out then. Should have gone straight to the ranger station and reported Jake missing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there somewhere. Maybe hurt. Maybe waiting for help. And there was something else. Something that made my skin crawl when I tried to think about it directly. The growing certainty that I wasn't alone in these woods. I spent that day searching, following the creek upstream and down, calling Jake's name until my voice was hoarse. The forest felt different in daylight. Not better, just different. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the whisper sound of the creek and my own footsteps. I didn't see a single living thing all day. No birds, no squirrels, no insects. Even the water seemed empty of life. As evening approached, I returned to our campsite, exhausted and increasingly frantic. That's when I saw Jake sitting by the cold fire pit, his back to me, perfectly still. "Jake!" I called out, relief flooding through me. "Jesus, where were you? I've been looking for you all day." He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me at all, just sat there, staring into the pile of cold ash. I walked around in front of him, and my relief curdled into something cold and terrible. It was Jake, but it wasn't. He looked exactly the same clothes, same face, same sandy brown hair, but something fundamental was wrong. His eyes were open but completely vacant, like windows into an empty house. His skin had a waxy, artificial quality, like a department store mannequin. And he was smiling, a wide, pleasant smile that never wavered, never changed, never reached his empty eyes. "Jake," I said, my voice barely a whisper. His head turned toward me with a slow, mechanical precision that made my stomach lurch. The smile never changed, and those empty eyes focused on my face with the flat, predatory attention of a shark. "Hello, Michael," he said, and his voice was exactly right. Same tone, same inflection, but underneath it was something else, something that made every nerve in my body scream danger. "I've been waiting for you." I took a step back, hand instinctively moving to the knife on my belt. "Where were you last night? I couldn't find you anywhere." "I was here," he said, still smiling that horrible, unchanging smile. "I've always been here." "That's not... Jake, your tent was empty. You were gone." "Was I?" He cocked his head to one side, like a curious dog, but the movement was wrong. Too fast and too far. "Are you sure about that, Michael?" I was backing away now, unable to look away from those empty eyes. "What happened to you?" "Nothing happened to me." He stood up with that same mechanical precision, joints moving like a marionette's. "I'm exactly what I've always been. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I turned and ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, roots trying to trip me at every step. Behind me, I could hear Jake following, or the thing that looked like Jake. It wasn't running, just walking with steady, measured steps, but somehow it was keeping pace with me no matter how fast I went. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, finally collapsing against a massive oak tree. The forest around me was completely unfamiliar. I'd run off the trail, lost my bearings entirely. In the gathering dusk, every tree looked the same, every shadow held potential threats. The thing that looked like Jake stepped out from behind a tree maybe 20 feet away, still wearing that pleasant, empty smile. "You can't run from yourself, Michael," it said conversationally. "You can't run from what you've done." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" It took a step closer, and I could see that its clothes were completely clean and dry, despite following me through miles of dense forest. "Rebecca didn't leave because she fell out of love with you. She left because she was afraid of you." "That's not true." "The night she told you she wanted a divorce, you don't remember, do you? How angry you got, how your hands shook when you grabbed her wrists. I never hurt Rebecca." But even as I said it, I could feel the memory trying to surface, dark and shameful. "The bruises took 2 weeks to fade," it continued, still smiling. "She never told anyone where they came from. Never pressed charges. Just packed her things and left while you were at work." "Stop it." "But you remember now, don't you? You remember the look in her eyes, the fear." The memory hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca backing away from me, tears streaming down her face, holding her wrists protectively against her chest. The red marks my fingers had left on her pale skin. The way she flinched when I tried to apologize, to explain that I hadn't meant to grab her so hard. "I was drunk," I whispered. "I didn't mean—" "You meant it," the thing said, taking another step closer. "You wanted to hurt her. You wanted to make her feel as small and powerless as you felt. And deep down, part of you enjoyed it." I couldn't argue because it was true. In that moment of rage and desperation when Rebecca had told me she was leaving, I had wanted to hurt her. The shame of that realization had been eating at me ever since, driving me to this remote forest where I'd hoped to outdistance my own guilt. "What are you?" I asked. "I'm the part of you that you've been running from," it said. "The part you don't want to acknowledge. The anger, the violence, the potential for real harm. You can't escape me by running into the wilderness, Michael. I'm already inside you." It was close enough now that I could smell that sweet, rotten odor I'd noticed in Jake's tent. The smell of decay, of something beautiful that had been left to rot. Where's the real Jake? There is no real Jake. There never was. Jake is just another story you told yourself, another way to avoid looking at who you really are. Just like this camping trip was another way to avoid dealing with what you've done. I pulled out my knife, the blade catching the last rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. "Stay back." The thing that looked like Jake laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You're going to stab me, Michael? Going to solve your problems with violence again? That's very much in character." But I wasn't looking at it anymore. I was looking at my own hands, holding the knife and seeing Rebecca's wrists, seeing the red marks my fingers had left, seeing the fear in her eyes when she realized what I was capable of. The thing was right. I had run to the wilderness not to heal, but to hide, to avoid confronting the darkness in myself that had driven away the one person I claimed to love. And now that darkness had followed me here, taken the shape of my friend, and was forcing me to face the truth. I dropped the knife. "There we go," the thing said, its smile widening impossibly. "Now we're getting somewhere." The forest around us was changing, the trees growing taller and closer together, blocking out the sky. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and I could see my breath forming clouds in the suddenly frigid air. "This is all in my head," I said, more to myself than to the thing. "You're not real. Jake is real, and he's missing, and I need to find him." Jake was never here. "Michael, check your car keys." I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers numb with cold. The keys were there, but attached to the keychain was only one car key. Mine. No spare, no key to Jake's car, and when I really thought about it, I couldn't remember Jake driving separately to the trailhead. I couldn't remember his car at all. "You drove here alone," the thing said gently, almost kindly. You've been alone this whole time. Jake was just a story you told yourself to make the isolation bearable. But the isolation is the point, isn't it? You needed to be alone with your guilt. The false Jake was dissolving now, its features running like melted wax, revealing something underneath that was too terrible to look at directly. I caught glimpses. Too many teeth, eyes like broken mirrors, skin that moved with a life of its own. "I can give you what you really want," it said, its voice changing, becoming something that scraped against my eardrums like nails on a chalkboard. "I can take the guilt away, take the memory away. You can go back to believing you're a good man who was wronged by an ungrateful wife." The offer was tempting. God, it was tempting. To forget the look in Rebecca's eyes, to forget the feel of her wrists in my hands, to go back to the comfortable fiction that I was the victim in my own story. Or, it continued, you can accept what you are. Accept the darkness. Stop fighting it and let it consume you completely. Become something that never has to feel guilt or shame or regret again. I could feel it pulling at me. This thing that might have been a demon or a manifestation of my own psyche. It didn't matter which. I could feel myself wanting to give in, to let it take away the pain of self-awareness. But then I thought about Rebecca again. Not the moment when I hurt her, but all the other moments. Her laugh when I told a stupid joke, the way she hummed while she cooked, how she'd curl up against me during scary movies, even though we both knew she was braver than I was, the way she'd believed in me, supported me, loved me, until I gave her reason to fear me. I didn't deserve forgiveness, from her or from myself. But maybe I could deserve something else. Maybe I could deserve the chance to be better than what I'd been. "No," I said. The thing's features solidified back into Jake's face, but Jake's face twisted with rage. "No? I won't forget, and I won't give in. What I did was wrong, and I have to live with that. But I don't have to let it define me forever." "You think you can change?" It laughed, but the sound was weaker now, less certain. "You think you can just decide to be a better person?" "I don't know, but I can try. And I can start by getting out of these woods and calling the police to report myself for domestic violence. Rebecca deserves justice, even if it's 2 years late." The thing was backing away now, its form becoming less solid, more like smoke. "You'll never make it out. You're lost, alone, miles from anywhere. You'll die out here. Maybe, but I'll die trying to do the right thing for once." The forest was lightening around us, the oppressive darkness lifting. The thing that had worn Jake's face was fading, becoming translucent, but its voice still echoed among the trees. "I'll be back," it whispered. "Every time you're angry, every time you feel powerless, every time you want to hurt someone weaker than you, I'll be there. I'm part of you, Michael. You can't escape what you are." "I know," I said, "but I can choose what I do about it." And then it was gone, leaving me alone in a forest that suddenly felt normal again. I could hear birds singing, see squirrels moving through the branches above. The creek nearby burbled pleasantly, sounding like water instead of whispers. I was still lost. My supplies were back at a campsite that might not even exist. My phone had no signal, and I had no idea which direction would lead me back to civilization. But for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of running away. It took me 3 days to find my way out. 3 days of drinking creek water and eating berries, of following game trails that led nowhere, of sleeping under the stars with nothing but my jacket for warmth. But I was thinking clearly for the first time since Rebecca left, making plans instead of just reacting to my circumstances. When I finally stumbled onto a Forest Service road and flagged down a ranger's truck, the first thing I did was ask to use his radio to call the police. Not to report Jake missing, I was beginning to accept that Jake had never been there at all, but to turn myself in for what I'd done to my ex-wife 2 years earlier. The ranger, a kind-faced man named Bill Peterson, listened to my halting confession with professional patience. He didn't arrest me, that wasn't his job, but he drove me to the local sheriff's station and waited while I gave my statement. The legal process took months. Rebecca, when contacted, was surprised but not entirely shocked that I had finally come forward. She agreed to testify about what had happened, though she seemed more sad than angry. The prosecutor, considering the time that had passed and Rebecca's wishes, offered me a plea deal: anger management classes, community service, and a restraining order that I readily agreed to. But the real judgment wasn't legal. It was the work of rebuilding myself into someone who deserved to exist in the world without causing harm. I sold my house and moved to a smaller apartment. Started therapy with a counselor who specialized in domestic violence perpetrators. Began volunteering at a shelter for abused women, doing maintenance work and keeping my mouth shut unless someone specifically asked for my input. The thing in the woods had been right about one aspect. The darkness was still inside me. There were moments when I felt that old anger rising, when I wanted to lash out at someone weaker, when the urge to control and dominate surged through me like poison. But now I recognized those moments for what they were, and I had tools to deal with them that didn't involve hurting other people. I never went camping again, never felt the urge to escape into the wilderness, because I'd learned that you can't outrun yourself, and the most dangerous predators aren't the ones that hunt in the forest. They're the ones that live inside civilized society, wearing human faces and telling themselves comfortable lies about their own nature. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that whispered voice from the creek, reminding me of what I'm capable of becoming if I stop paying attention. But I'm paying attention now. I'm watching myself, questioning my motives, choosing my actions carefully. It's not redemption. I'm not sure I believe in that anymore. But it's responsibility. And sometimes that's enough. The thing that wore Jake's face taught me that running from your demons doesn't make them disappear. It just gives them time to grow stronger in the darkness. The only way to defeat them is to drag them into the light, acknowledge them for what they are, and make the conscious choice every single day to be something better. I still have nightmares about those 3 days in Savage River State Forest, but I'm grateful for them in a way. They showed me that the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that lurk in remote wilderness areas. They're the ones that lurk in human hearts, wearing familiar faces and telling us we're not responsible for the harm we cause. In the end, the real horror wasn't supernatural at all. It was the realization that I had been running from myself, and that myself was something worth running from. But it was also the discovery that even the darkest parts of human nature can be acknowledged, accepted, and ultimately controlled, if you're willing to do the work. The creek still whispers in my dreams sometimes, offering to take away the guilt, the shame, the responsibility. And sometimes, in my weakest moments, I'm still tempted to listen. But I don't, because I've learned that guilt isn't a burden to be escaped. It's a compass pointing toward the person I need to become. And shame, properly understood, isn't self-indulgence. It's the foundation of genuine change. The wilderness taught me that the most dangerous predator I'd ever encounter was the one looking back at me from the mirror. But it also taught me that even predators can choose to stop hunting, if they're willing to face what they really are. That's a lesson worth remembering, even if it came from the darkest place I've ever been. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of Savage Mountain, deep in the Allegheny Mountains of western Maryland, near the Pennsylvania border, where the old logging roads disappear into dense forest that hasn't seen a human footprint in decades. I should have listened to the locals in Frostburg when they warned us about that section of the mountain. Should have paid attention when the gas station attendant's face went pale at the mention of our destination. But Sarah and I were too caught up in our plans, too eager to escape the suffocating routine of our Baltimore office jobs for a long weekend of hiking and camping. Sarah Martinez had been my girlfriend for 3 years, and lately things between us had grown strained. The constant pressure of deadlines, the cramped apartment we shared, the way we'd started snapping at each other over trivial things, we both knew we needed this trip. A chance to reconnect, to remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. The plan was simple. Drive to Western Maryland, hike deep into the Savage River State Forest, set up camp near one of the old mining sites, and spend 3 days with nothing but each other and the wilderness. We left Baltimore early Friday morning, my old Jeep loaded with our gear. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, studying the topographic maps we'd printed. She was always the planner, methodical and careful where I tended to be impulsive. It was one of the things I loved about her, though lately it had started to feel more like criticism than complementarity. "The trailhead is here," she said, pointing to a spot on the map where a thin line marked an old Forest Service road. "From there, it's about 6 miles to the abandoned iron furnace site. That's where we'll set up camp." The drive took us through increasingly rural terrain. Rolling hills gave way to dense forest, and the roads became narrower, more winding. Cell phone towers disappeared behind the mountains, and our phones lost signal somewhere around Grantsville. Sarah seemed nervous about that, checking her phone repeatedly, even though the screen showed no bars. "It's good," I told her. "No distractions, just us." She nodded, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Sarah had always been uncomfortable with isolation, a fact I'd learned during our first camping trip 2 years ago. She'd grown up in the city, and the complete absence of urban sounds, no traffic, no sirens, no voices, made her anxious. But she'd agreed to this trip because she knew I needed it, and because we both hoped it might help us find our way back to each other. We reached the trailhead around noon. It was nothing more than a rusted gate with a faded Forest Service sign and a narrow dirt track disappearing into the trees. The woods here were old growth, massive oaks and maples that blocked out most of the sky. The silence was immediate and profound, broken only by the distant sound of running water and the occasional bird call. We shouldered our packs and started hiking. The trail was well marked at first, following an old logging road that wound gradually upward through the forest. Sarah walked ahead of me, her movement steady and determined. She was in better shape than I was, a fact that had become embarrassingly apparent during our preparation hikes around Patapsco Valley State Park. "How far have we gone?" she asked after what felt like an hour. I checked my GPS watch. "About 2 miles. We're making good time." The device showed our location as a blinking dot on a green background, but something about the display seemed off. The trail we were following didn't quite match the one shown on the screen, and our elevation readings kept fluctuating wildly. "GPS is acting weird," I told Sarah. She stopped and pulled out her phone, even though we both knew it was useless. "Mine's been doing strange things too. The compass keeps spinning." We pressed on, following the marked trail posts. The forest grew denser as we climbed, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Even in early October, the deep woods held onto summer's warmth longer than the open areas, but here the air felt unseasonably cold, almost winter-sharp. Around the 4-mile mark, we encountered our first real problem. The trail simply ended. One moment we were following clear blazes on the trees, and the next, we stood in a small clearing with no visible path leading out of it. The blazes just stopped, as if whoever had been marking the trail had simply vanished mid-task. "This can't be right," Sarah said, consulting her map. "The trail should continue for another 2 miles. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, looking for any sign of the path. Nothing. The trees pressed in on all sides, their trunks so close together that pushing through would be nearly impossible with our heavy packs. "Maybe we missed a turn," I suggested. We backtracked 1/2 mile but found no side trails, no missed blazes. The marked path led directly to the clearing and nowhere else. "We could follow the ridgeline," I said, pointing upward through the trees. "The iron furnace site should be somewhere up there." Sarah looked uncertain. "Off-trail hiking wasn't part of the plan. It's only a couple miles. We have the GPS coordinates." She agreed reluctantly, and we began pushing through the underbrush. The forest floor was thick with fallen leaves that muffled our footsteps completely. No matter how heavily we walked, our feet made no sound, as if the earth itself were absorbing every impact. The silence was becoming oppressive. In normal woods, there should have been sounds. Insects, small animals moving through the brush, whined in the leaves. But here, the air was perfectly still, and the only sounds were our own breathing and the occasional creak of our pack straps. After an hour of difficult hiking, we crested a ridge and found ourselves looking down into a small valley. At the bottom, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, stood the ruins of the old iron furnace, a massive stone structure with a tall chimney that stretched toward the canopy like an accusing finger. "There it is," Sarah said, and I heard relief in her voice. We made our way down the slope, sliding on loose leaves and grabbing at tree branches for support. The furnace was larger than I'd expected, maybe 30 feet tall with thick stone walls blackened by decades of weather. Scattered around it were the remains of other structures, foundations mostly, with a few partial walls still standing. "This place is incredible," I said, dropping my pack near what looked like the remains of a worker's cabin. "Can you imagine what it was like when it was operational?" Sarah was examining the main furnace structure. "When did you say this was abandoned?" "The 1920s, I think, maybe earlier." She ran her hand along the stone wall, then pulled it back quickly. "Mike, feel this." I touched the wall where she'd indicated. The stone was warm, almost hot despite the cool air. "Probably just absorbed heat from the sun," I said, though the furnace had been in shadow since we'd arrived. We set up our tent on a flat area about 50 yards from the ruins, following the principles of leave no trace camping. Sarah insisted on the distance, saying she didn't want to sleep too close to the old structures. I thought she was being overly cautious, but I didn't argue. The relationship was fragile enough without adding unnecessary conflict. As the sun began to set, I gathered wood for a fire while Sarah prepared dinner on our camp stove. The woods seemed to close in around us as darkness approached, and the silence became even more pronounced. I found myself straining to hear something, anything, that would indicate normal forest life. "Did you notice we haven't seen any animals?" Sarah asked as we ate our freeze-dried pasta. I had noticed, but I'd been trying not to think about it. No squirrels, no birds, no insects. Even the streams we'd crossed had been strangely lifeless, the water running clear and cold but empty of the fish and aquatic insects that should have been there. After dinner, I built up the fire and we sat close together, watching the flames dance against the darkness. The fire seemed reluctant to catch, and when it finally did, the flames burned with an odd blue-green tinge that I attributed to minerals in the wood. "Tell me about the nightmares again," Sarah said suddenly. I looked at her in surprise. She was staring into the fire, her face tense. "What nightmares?" "The ones you've been having. You talk in your sleep, Mike. You've been talking in your sleep for months." This was news to me. "What do I say?" "Names. You say names over and over. People I don't know. And you sound terrified." I didn't know what to tell her. I'd been having strange dreams lately, vivid and disturbing, but they always faded upon waking, leaving only a lingering sense of dread. "Maybe it's just stress from work," I said. She nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Maybe." We went to bed early, zipping ourselves into our two-person tent. Sarah fell asleep quickly, her breathing becoming deep and regular within minutes. But I lay awake, listening to the silence outside. It was so complete that it felt almost solid, like a weight pressing down on the tent. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of Sarah moving around. The sleeping bag beside me was empty, the zipper open. I could hear her moving outside the tent, her footsteps unnaturally quiet on the fallen leaves. "Sarah?" I called softly. No response. I unzipped the tent fly and looked out. She was standing about 20 feet away, near the fire pit, her back to me. She was perfectly still, and in the moonlight her white t-shirt made her look almost ethereal. "Sarah, what are you doing?" She didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. I crawled out of the tent and approached her slowly. As I got closer, I could see that she was staring at the iron furnace ruins, her head tilted slightly to one side as if she were listening to something. "Sarah?" I reached out and touched her shoulder. Her skin was ice cold, and when she turned to look at me, her eyes were completely unfocused, as if she were still asleep. "Come back to bed," I said gently, taking her hand. She followed me without resistance, climbing back into the sleeping bag and immediately falling into what seemed like deep sleep. But for the rest of the night, I lay awake, disturbed by the incident and by how cold her skin had been. I woke at dawn to find Sarah already up, boiling water for coffee on the camp stove. She seemed perfectly normal, cheerful even. "Sleep well?" she asked. "You don't remember getting up last night?" She looked puzzled. "Getting up? I slept straight through. Best sleep I've had in weeks." I decided not to push it. Maybe I'd been the one dreaming. We spent the morning exploring the furnace ruins more thoroughly. In daylight, they were even more impressive, a testament to the industrial ambition of the 19th century. Sarah took dozens of photos, her mood lighter than it had been in months. "Look at this," she called from inside the main furnace structure. I climbed through the opening and found her examining the interior walls. The stone was blackened with ancient soot, but there was something else, symbols carved into the rock. Crude, but deliberately made. "Graffiti from the workers, maybe," I suggested. But the symbols didn't look like typical graffiti. They were geometric patterns, circles and lines that seemed to form some kind of language or code. And they were everywhere, covering nearly every surface inside the furnace. "These look old," Sarah said, running her finger along one of the carved lines. "Really old, maybe older than the furnace itself." I was about to respond when we heard it, a sound that made us both freeze. It was human voices, distant but unmistakable, coming from the direction we'd hiked in from. But the voices were wrong somehow, all speaking at once in what sounded like a chant or incantation. We looked at each other, and I could see my own confusion reflected in Sarah's eyes. "Other hikers," she whispered. I shook my head. We hadn't seen another human being since leaving Frostburg, and the voices had a quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. The chanting continued for several minutes, growing slightly louder, then gradually fading away. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed seemed even more oppressive than before. "Let's get out of here," Sarah said. I wanted to investigate, to find the source of the voices, but the look on Sarah's face stopped me. She was genuinely frightened, and after the incident the night before, I didn't want to add to her stress. We packed up quickly and started hiking back toward the trailhead. But within an hour, we encountered another problem. The route we'd taken the day before seemed different somehow. The ridgelines didn't match what I remembered, and several times we found ourselves at dead ends where I was certain we'd hiked through open forest. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Sarah asked after we'd backtracked for the third time. I consulted my GPS watch, but the display was showing impossible readings, negative elevations, compass bearings that changed as I watched. "The GPS is completely screwed up," I admitted. We tried following the sun, hiking generally eastward toward where the trailhead should be. But the forest seemed to shift around us, paths that looked promising leading to impassable thickets, clearings that should have provided good sighting points blocked by trees that seemed taller than they had been the day before. By late afternoon, we were forced to admit we were lost. The realization hit Sarah hard, and I could see her fighting back panic. "This is impossible," she said. "We hiked in a straight line yesterday. How can we not be able to find our way back?" I didn't have an answer. The forest around us looked the same in every direction. Dense, dark, and unwelcoming. We were supposed to be heading home that evening, back to Baltimore and our normal lives. Instead, we were trapped in wilderness that seemed to have no intention of letting us go. We made camp in a small clearing, rationing our remaining food and water. The temperature dropped again as darkness approached, and this time I noticed that our fire wouldn't stay lit no matter what I did. The flames would catch, burn for a few minutes with that same strange blue-green color, then die out as if something were actively extinguishing them. "Why won't it burn?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with stress. "Must be the wood," I said, though I'd tried branches from several different trees with the same result. We ate a cold dinner and went to bed early, huddled together in our sleeping bags for warmth. But sleep was difficult. The silence outside was broken periodically by sounds that didn't belong in any forest I knew, mechanical clicking noises, what sounded like metal scraping against stone, and once, unmistakably, the sound of something large moving through the trees with footsteps that were almost but not quite human. Around midnight, I woke to find Sarah sitting up in her sleeping bag, staring at the tent wall with that same unfocused expression I'd seen the night before. "Sarah." She didn't respond. Slowly, she began to unzip the tent fly. "Sarah, don't." I grabbed her arm, and again her skin was ice cold. This time she resisted when I tried to pull her back, her muscles rigid with unnatural strength. Her eyes were open but completely blank, and when she spoke, her voice was flat and emotionless. "I have to go to them," she said. "Go to who?" "They're calling." I couldn't hear anything, but Sarah was pulling away from me with increasing force. It took all my strength to keep her from leaving the tent. "Sarah, wake up." I shook her shoulders, and suddenly her eyes focused. She blinked several times, looking confused. "Mike, what's happening?" "You were sleepwalking again." She looked down at her hands on the tent zipper, as if surprised to find them there. "I don't remember." The rest of the night passed without incident, but I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the alien sounds outside and watching Sarah for any sign that she might try to leave again. The third day began with another shock. Our backpacks, which we'd secured inside the tent vestibule, were gone. Not stolen. Gone, as if they'd simply vanished. Our food, our water, our first aid kit, everything except what we were wearing and what had been in the tent with us. "This is impossible," Sarah said, her voice rising toward hysteria. "Packs don't just disappear." I searched the area around our campsite, looking for any sign of what might have happened. There were no footprints, no drag marks, no indication that any creature had been near our tent. "Maybe animals," I suggested weakly. "What kind of animal carries away an entire backpack without leaving tracks?" I had no answer for that. With no food or water, we had to find our way out immediately. I tried to stay calm for Sarah's sake, but internally I was beginning to panic. We were lost in wilderness that seemed to actively resist our attempts to navigate. Our equipment was mysteriously disappearing, and Sarah was exhibiting behavior that terrified me. We started hiking again, but now every direction looked the same. The trees seemed to close in around us, and several times I had the distinct impression that the forest was rearranging itself when we weren't looking, paths disappearing and reappearing in impossible configurations. "Mike," Sarah said suddenly, grabbing my arm. "Look." Ahead of us, barely visible through the trees, was a figure. It was human-shaped but too tall, too thin, moving with an irregular gait that sent chills down my spine. "Hello," I called out, more from instinct than any real desire to make contact. The figure stopped and slowly turned toward us. Even at a distance, I could see that something was wrong with its proportions, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Don't," Sarah whispered, but I was already moving toward it. As I got closer, the figure resolved into something that made my stomach turn. It was wearing clothes, jeans, a hiking boot on one foot, a torn jacket, but the body inside them wasn't human. The limbs were wrong, jointed in too many places, and the face was a blank expanse of pale skin with no features except 2 holes where eyes should have been. The thing that had been wearing human clothes took a step toward me, and I heard a sound like bones breaking. It opened its mouth, a black slash that went too far back into its head, and spoke in a voice that was like static electricity. "Michael Williams." I ran. Pure animal terror took over, and I crashed through the forest back toward where I'd left Sarah, branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear the thing following, its footsteps making that same bone-breaking sound with each step. Sarah, run. But when I reached our campsite, she was gone. Not just gone, it was as if she'd never been there. The depression where she'd been sitting was smooth and undisturbed, and when I called her name, my voice seemed to be absorbed by the trees without even an echo. I was alone. The thing in human clothes had stopped following me, but I could still hear it moving through the forest, making sounds that were almost like speech. I hid behind a large oak tree, trying to control my breathing and figure out what to do next. That's when I heard Sarah's voice. "Mike? Mike, where are you?" She sounded normal, maybe a little worried, but definitely Sarah. I was about to call back when something stopped me. The voice was coming from the wrong direction, from deeper in the forest where I knew she couldn't have gone. "Mike, I'm lost. Please help me." I crept toward the sound, using trees for cover. Sarah's voice continued calling, but as I got closer, I began to notice inconsistencies. The tone was right, but the inflection was slightly off, as if someone were trying to imitate her speech patterns but didn't quite have them right. I found her standing in a small clearing, her back to me. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on that morning, and her posture was perfectly normal. But something about the scene felt wrong. "Sarah." She turned around and her face was exactly as I remembered it. But her eyes were wrong. Not the color or the shape, but the expression. They were completely empty, like looking into dark water. "There you are," she said and smiled, but the smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. I backed away slowly, and the thing wearing Sarah's face followed, still smiling that impossible smile. "What's wrong, Mike? Don't you want to be with me?" "You're not Sarah." "Of course I am. I'm exactly Sarah." It was true, in a way. Everything about the figure was perfect, from the scar on her chin from a childhood accident to the way she tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking. But the emptiness in those eyes made it clear that whatever this was, it wasn't the woman I loved. "Where is she?" I demanded. "I am her. She is me. We are us." The thing that looked like Sarah took another step toward me, and I saw that her feet weren't quite touching the ground. I ran again, crashing through the forest with no destination in mind except away. Behind me, I could hear Sarah's voice calling my name, but the tone was becoming less human with each repetition, developing an electronic quality that made my teeth ache. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to have no meaning in that forest. The sun never seemed to move, holding the same position in the sky despite what felt like hours of desperate flight. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to stop, and I found myself back at the iron furnace ruins. I collapsed beside the old stone structure, gasping for breath. The furnace was exactly as we'd left it, except for one detail that made my blood freeze. Sarah's camera was sitting on the ground beside the entrance, exactly where she'd left it while exploring. But we'd taken the camera with us when we'd left. I remembered her putting it in her pack. With trembling hands, I picked up the camera and turned it on. The LCD screen flickered to life, showing the last photo in memory. It was a picture of me, standing inside the furnace and examining the carved symbols. But I wasn't alone in the photo. Behind me, barely visible in the shadows, was another figure. It was tall and thin, with 2 long limbs and a featureless face, exactly like the thing I'd encountered in the forest. I scrolled through the other photos Sarah had taken. In every single one, the thing was there. Sometimes in the background, sometimes standing right next to us. In one photo, taken of Sarah examining the carved symbols, the creature was right behind her, its arms reaching toward her as if preparing to embrace her. The final photo on the camera was one I didn't remember being taken. It showed our tent at night, with 2 figures sitting by the dead fire. One was me, clearly visible in the moonlight. The other was Sarah, but her face was wrong, blank and featureless like the creature's. I dropped the camera and heard it shatter on the stone. That's when I noticed the carved symbols inside the furnace were glowing with a faint blue-green light, the same color as our fire had burned. Michael Williams. I spun around to find the real Sarah standing at the entrance to the furnace. She looked exactly as she had that morning, except for her eyes. They held an intelligence that was vast and alien and completely devoid of human warmth. "You're not Sarah," I said. "I am Sarah Martinez, 30 years old, born in Baltimore, Maryland. I work as a graphic designer for Morrison & Associates. I have a scar on my chin from falling off my bicycle when I was 7. I love Thai food and hate horror movies. I am exactly Sarah." Every detail was correct, but the way she recited them was like reading from a script. What did you do with her? I became her. She became me. It is the way of things here. The thing wearing Sarah's form gestured toward the carved symbols on the furnace walls. "This place is old, Michael Williams. Older than your iron furnace, older than your people. It is a door, and we have been waiting. Waiting for what? For someone to open it completely. Your Sarah was perfect for this purpose. Her fear, her isolation, her love for you, all of it made her an ideal vessel." I thought about the night Sarah had gotten up, the cold touch of her skin, the empty expression in her eyes. "How long?" I asked. "Since the first night. She heard our call and came to us willingly. You tried to stop her, but flesh is weak when the spirit is already gone." The creature moved closer, and I could see that it wasn't quite solid. It shifted and wavered like heat distortion, as if Sarah's form were simply a mask it was wearing. "She fought at first," it continued conversationally, "but fear makes the mind fragile, and loneliness makes it desperate. Soon, she stopped struggling and let us in completely. What do you want with me? You are the anchor. Love is what keeps us bound to her form, makes the deception complete. As long as you believe she is Sarah, she remains Sarah. But now that you know the truth," the creature's form began to shift and blur. Sarah's features melted away, revealing the tall, thin figure with too many joints and no face that I'd seen in the forest. "Now, we no longer need the pretense." It reached for me with arms that stretched impossibly long, fingers that were more like bone talons. I dodged backwards, stumbling over the rubble around the furnace base. "Where is she? Where is the real Sarah?" "Gone, consumed, replaced. She screamed for you at the end, called your name as we devoured her memories and wore her skin." The rage that filled me then was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I grabbed a piece of broken stone from the furnace rubble and hurled it at the creature. It passed right through its body without effect. "You cannot hurt us, Michael Williams. We are not flesh that can be torn, or bone that can be broken. We are older than your species, and we will persist long after it is extinct." But even as it spoke, I noticed something. The stone I'd thrown had struck one of the carved symbols on the furnace wall, and the blue-green glow had flickered and dimmed. I grabbed another rock and aimed more carefully this time, hitting a different symbol. Again, the glow dimmed. The creature let out a sound like static interference, and its form wavered. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer, instead focusing on systematically destroying every carved symbol I could reach. With each impact, the creature became less solid, its outline growing fainter. "Stop!" It lunged at me, but its talons passed harmlessly through my body. I worked with desperate efficiency, smashing symbol after symbol. Some were too high to reach, but I threw rocks at them, chipping away at the ancient carvings that seemed to be the source of the creature's power. As the last accessible symbol cracked and went dark, the creature let out a shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Its form began to collapse in on itself, the borrowed features of Sarah's face twisting into impossible geometries. "This does not end here, Michael Williams. We are patient. We will find you again." The thing imploded with a sound like a thunderclap, leaving only empty air and the smell of ozone. I stood alone in the ruins, breathing hard and bleeding from dozens of small cuts where the stone chips had hit me. The silence was different now. Natural silence, with the distant sound of wind in the trees and water running over stone. My phone, which had been dead for days, suddenly chirped with an incoming text message. The screen showed full signal strength and dozens of missed calls and messages from the past 3 days. According to the timestamp, it was Monday evening. I'd been missing for 3 days. The GPS function was working again, too, showing my exact location and a clear route back to the trailhead. I gathered what few possessions I had left and started hiking. The forest seemed normal now. I saw squirrels and birds, heard insects buzzing in the undergrowth. The trails were clearly marked and led exactly where they were supposed to lead. Within 2 hours, I emerged at the trailhead where my Jeep sat exactly as I'd left it. The drive back to Baltimore passed in a blur. I knew I should report Sarah missing, should contact the authorities and organize search parties. But how could I explain what had really happened? Who would believe that she'd been consumed by something that lived in the carved symbols of an abandoned iron furnace? In the end, I told the police that we'd become separated during the hike and that I'd searched for her as long as possible before making my way out to get help. They organized search parties, brought in dogs and helicopters, scoured hundreds of acres of forest. They found no trace of her. The official conclusion was that Sarah Martinez had become lost in the wilderness and died of exposure or injury. Her body was never recovered. I attended the memorial service, accepted the condolences of friends and family, and tried to move on with my life. But I know the truth. Whatever consumed Sarah is still out there, waiting in places where the civilized world grows thin. It feeds on isolation and fear, uses love as a weapon against those who care too much to see clearly. Sometimes, late at night, I hear Sarah's voice calling my name from outside my apartment. When I look out the window, I see her standing on the sidewalk, illuminated by the streetlight. She looks exactly as she did on that last morning, beautiful and familiar and completely wrong. She waves to me and smiles that too wide smile, showing too many teeth. I never wave back, and I never go outside after dark anymore. But I know that someday, when my guard is down or my resolve weakens, I'll open that door. I'll go to her because part of me will always love Sarah Martinez, even knowing that the thing wearing her face devoured her completely and is only waiting for the chance to do the same to me. The carved symbols are gone, destroyed by my desperate vandalism that night in the forest. But the creature that lived within them has found a new anchor, a new source of power. It has my love for Sarah, and as long as that love exists, so does it. So I live carefully now, staying away from isolated places, avoiding the wilderness entirely. I tell myself that I'm being paranoid, that what happened on Savage Mountain was some kind of stress-induced breakdown brought on by the pressures of a failing relationship. But deep down, I know better. And sometimes when I'm walking through the city at night and happen to pass by a darkened alley or an empty parking garage, I catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. When I turn to look, there's never anything there, but I can feel it watching, waiting with infinite patience for the moment when my defenses fail, and my longing for what I've lost overcomes my knowledge of what really lurks in the darkness between worlds. The thing that was once Sarah Martinez is still hungry, and it knows exactly where to find me. My name is Thomas Davis, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness near Seneca Creek State Park in Maryland, deep in the wooded hills where cell towers can't reach and the nearest road is miles away through unmarked trails. I should have listened to my gut when Sarah suggested we take this trip. My girlfriend of 3 years had been pushing for us to reconnect with nature after months of fighting about everything: my job, her family, whether we should move in together. The irony wasn't lost on me that we'd chosen to isolate ourselves in the wilderness to work on our communication problems. Sarah Martinez was the type of person who believed every problem could be solved with enough positive thinking and organic tea. At 29, she still had that optimistic energy that I'd found attractive when we first met, though lately it grated against my increasingly cynical worldview. Her friend Jessica Williams had invited herself along, a 28-year-old fitness instructor who treated every outdoor activity like a personal challenge to conquer. "It'll be perfect," Sarah had insisted, spreading topographical maps across my kitchen table. 3 days, 2 nights, just us and the wilderness. No phones, no distractions, just pure connection. I'd wanted to point out that no phones meant no way to call for help if something went wrong. But Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious, and Jessica kept nodding along like some kind of athletic bobblehead. Besides, I'd been camping plenty of times before. What could go wrong in a Maryland state forest? The drive to our starting point took us through increasingly remote countryside, past farms that looked abandoned and forests that seemed to press closer to the narrow country roads with each mile. We parked at a dirt pullout that barely qualified as a trailhead, marked only by a weathered wooden sign that read Seneca Creek Backcountry. No maintained trails beyond this point. "This is it?" Jessica asked, shouldering her oversized hiking pack. She'd brought enough gear for a week-long expedition, despite our modest 3-day plan. "According to the GPS," I said, though the device had been acting strangely for the last 10 miles, occasionally showing us in completely wrong locations or losing signal entirely. I'd chalked it up to the remote location and tree cover. Sarah was already studying her paper map, a backup I'd insisted on despite her protests that we could rely on technology. "The creek should be about 2 miles northeast of here. We'll follow it upstream to find a good campsite." The trail, such as it was, quickly devolved from a marked path to barely visible deer tracks winding through dense forest. The canopy overhead was so thick that even though it was only mid-afternoon, the light had taken on that greenish underwater quality that made everything look slightly unreal. We walked in single file, Jessica leading with her aggressive pace, Sarah in the middle consulting her compass every few minutes, and me bringing up the rear, feeling increasingly uneasy about something I couldn't quite identify. The forest was too quiet. In my experience, woods were supposed to be full of sound. Birds, insects, small animals rustling through underbrush. Here, the only sound was our footsteps and the occasional crack of a branch underfoot. "Does anyone else notice how quiet it is?" I finally asked after we'd been walking for over an hour. "It's peaceful," Sarah said without turning around. "This is exactly what we needed." Jessica stopped abruptly, causing Sarah to nearly walk into her. "Do you guys hear that?" We all held our breath, listening. In the distance, barely audible, was the sound of running water. "The creek," Sarah said, relieved. "We're almost there." But as we got closer, the sound seemed wrong somehow. Creek water should burble and splash over rocks. This sounded more like whispering, like dozens of voices speaking just too quietly to make out words. The creek, when we finally reached it, was beautiful in a way that made my skin crawl. The water was perfectly clear, flowing over smooth black stones, but it moved with an odd sluggishness that didn't match the sound it made. Along the banks, the vegetation was lush and green, but some of the plants looked wrong. Leaves that were too large, flowers that were colors I'd never seen in nature. "This place is amazing," Jessica said, immediately starting to set up her tent on a flat area about 20 feet from the water's edge. "Look at how clear the water is." Sarah was already kneeling by the creek, dipping her fingers in the flow. "It's warm," she said, surprised. "Like bath water." I dropped my pack but didn't start unpacking. Something about this place felt off, and every survival instinct I had was telling me to keep walking, find somewhere else to camp. But the light was already starting to fade, and we'd been hiking for hours. "Maybe we should look for another spot," I suggested. "Somewhere not so close to the water, in case it rains and the creek rises." "Don't be such a pessimist," Sarah said, though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. "This is perfect." As we set up camp, the wrongness of the place became more apparent. My tent stakes wouldn't hold in the ground properly, as if the earth itself was pushing them back out. The water in my bottles had developed a strange taste, metallic and slightly sweet. Most disturbing of all, Our shadows seemed to move independently, shifting and wavering even when we stood perfectly still. By the time we had our tents up and a fire ring built, full darkness had fallen with unnatural speed. One moment there had been the gradual dimming of twilight, and the next we were surrounded by absolute blackness that seemed to press against our small circle of firelight like a living thing. "The fire won't catch," Jessica said, frustrated. She'd been trying to light our kindling for 20 minutes, but every time the flames would start to take hold, they'd flicker and die as if being snuffed out by an invisible hand. I took over, using my emergency fire starter and dry tinder I'd brought from home. The flames finally caught, but they burned with an odd blue-green tinge that made our faces look corpse-pale in the light. "That's unusual," Sarah said, staring at the flames. "Maybe it's the minerals in the wood." We cooked dinner in uncomfortable silence, each of us trying to ignore the growing sense that we were being watched. Every few minutes I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, but when I'd turn to look, there would be nothing but darkness beyond our fire's reach. It was Jessica who first noticed the sounds. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, gripping my arm with fingers that trembled despite her usual confidence. We all listened. From somewhere in the darkness came a sound like breathing. Not one person, but many, as if a crowd of people surrounded our camp, all inhaling and exhaling in perfect unison. "It's just the wind in the trees," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "There's no wind," I pointed out. The air was perfectly still, so motionless that even the smoke from our fire rose straight up without wavering. The breathing continued for several minutes, sometimes growing louder, sometimes fading to barely audible. Then it stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete that our ears rang. "I'm going to get some more firewood," Jessica announced, standing up with forced casualness. "I'll come with you," I said immediately. Every horror movie I'd ever seen had taught me that splitting up was a terrible idea. "I'm fine," she said, grabbing her flashlight. "There's plenty of dead wood just over there." She gestured toward a grove of bare trees about 50 feet from our camp. "Jessica, wait!" Sarah started, but Jessica was already walking into the darkness, her flashlight beam bobbing ahead of her. We watched her light disappear into the trees. For a few minutes we could hear her moving around, the crack of branches as she gathered wood. Then the sounds stopped. "Jessica!" Sarah called. No answer. "Jessica!" I shouted, loud enough that my voice echoed off the invisible hills around us. Still nothing. I grabbed my own flashlight and started toward the trees where she'd gone. "Jessica, where are you?" Sarah followed close behind me, her breathing rapid and shallow. We reached the grove where Jessica had been collecting wood and found her flashlight on the ground, still on, illuminating a small pile of branches she'd gathered, but Jessica was nowhere to be seen. "She has to be here," Sarah said, her voice rising with panic. "People don't just disappear." We searched for over an hour, calling her name, following her footprints in the soft earth until they simply ended. Not like she'd been grabbed or dragged away, but as if she'd taken one step and then ceased to exist. "We need to go back to the car," I said. "Get help." "We can't leave her," Sarah protested. "What if she's hurt? What if she's lost and trying to find her way back to camp?" Against my better judgment, we returned to our fire to wait, hoping Jessica would reappear. But as the hours passed, it became clear that something had happened to her, something that couldn't be explained by ordinary circumstances. Around midnight, we heard footsteps approaching our camp. "Jessica?" Sarah called hopefully. The footsteps stopped just outside our circle of firelight. In the darkness, we could make out a silhouette, human-shaped but somehow wrong. Too tall, too thin, limbs that bent at odd angles. "Jessica, is that you?" Sarah said again, starting to stand up. I grabbed her arm, holding her back. "That's not Jessica." The figure took a step forward and the firelight caught its face. It was Jessica. Her features, her hair, her clothes, but her expression was completely blank. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. Her mouth hung slightly open and a thin line of dark liquid ran down her chin. Jessica! Sarah tried to run to her, but I held her back. "Something's wrong with her," I hissed. "Look at her eyes." Jessica's eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire eye, as if they'd been filled with ink. She stood perfectly still, not blinking, not breathing, just staring at us with those awful, empty sockets. "Jessica, what happened to you?" Sarah whispered. Jessica's mouth moved. But instead of her voice, what came out was that whispering sound we'd heard from the creek. Dozens of voices speaking in unison, words in a language I didn't recognize but that made my bones ache to hear. Then she smiled. It was Jessica's smile, but it stretched too wide, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous, filling her mouth like a shark's. "We need to run," I said, pulling Sarah to her feet. "We can't leave her." "That's not her," I shouted, and at the sound of my voice, the Jessica thing's head snapped toward us with inhuman speed. It started walking toward us, and with each step, its body seemed to shift and change. Its limbs grew longer, its fingers stretched into claws, and that horrible smile never wavered. We ran. Behind us, I could hear it following, not running, but walking with measured steps that somehow kept pace with our panicked sprint through the darkness. Branches tore at our clothes and faces as we crashed through the underbrush, using our flashlights to navigate by their weak beams. "Where are we going?" Sarah gasped. "Back to the car," I said, though I had no idea if we were heading in the right direction. The forest all looked the same in the darkness, and our panic had destroyed any sense of direction. We ran for what felt like hours, stopping only when Sarah collapsed from exhaustion. We were in a small clearing, surrounded by trees that looked identical to every other tree we'd passed. My flashlight was dimming, and Sarah's had died completely. "We're lost," she whispered. I was about to argue when we heard the footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. "It's still following us," Sarah said, her voice breaking. The footsteps stopped just outside the clearing. In the weak light of my dying flashlight, I could see shapes moving between the trees. Not just one figure, but several. Too many. "Sarah," I whispered, "look." She followed my gaze and gasped. There were dozens of them now. Figures that looked like people we knew, but wrong in subtle ways. I saw my coworker Mark, but his head was on backwards. My neighbor Mrs. Chen, but with too many arms. Sarah's sister Lisa, but her face was melting like wax. And in the center of them all, still smiling that horrible smile, was Jessica. "They're not real," Sarah said, but she didn't sound convinced. The figures began to close in, walking with that same measured pace. As they got closer, I could see that they weren't quite solid. They flickered and shifted like mirages, and through their translucent bodies I could see the trees behind them. But Jessica was different. She was solid, real, and the dark liquid running from her mouth was leaving actual stains on her shirt. "We have to get out of here," I said, but there was nowhere to go. The figures had us surrounded. Jessica opened her mouth again, and this time the whispers were louder, clearer. I still couldn't understand the words, but I could feel their meaning pressing against my mind like cold fingers. "Join us. Stay with us. Become us." "No," I said, grabbing Sarah's hand. "We're leaving." I pushed past the nearest figure, the fake version of my coworker, and felt my skin burn where I touched it. But it gave way, dissolving like smoke, and we broke through the circle. Behind us, the whispers rose to a shriek of rage that made the trees shake. We ran again, crashing through the forest with no thought except escape. My flashlight finally died, leaving us in complete darkness, but somehow we kept going, guided by nothing but desperation and the gradually lightening sky. Dawn was breaking when we finally reached the road where we'd parked. Our car sat exactly where we'd left it, looking impossibly normal after the night we'd endured. "The keys," I said, patting my pockets frantically. "Where are the keys?" Sarah checked her pockets, then our packs. Nothing. "They're back at the campsite," she said. in your tent." We both looked back at the forest, dark and unwelcoming in the early morning light. Somewhere in there, our campsite waited with our keys, our supplies, and whatever had taken Jessica. "We'll have to walk to town," I said. "Flag down a car." But as we started down the road, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Tom, look." I turned and saw Jessica walking out of the forest toward us. She looked normal now. Her eyes were their usual brown. Her smile was natural, and there was no sign of the dark liquid that had stained her chin. "There you guys are," she called, jogging toward us. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Where did you go?" Sarah started toward her, relief flooding her face. "Jessica, we thought something happened to you. You disappeared, and then—" I caught Sarah's arm, stopping her. Something was wrong. Jessica looked right, sounded right, but— "Jessica," I said carefully, "what happened to you last night? Where did you go?" She looked confused. "Last night? What do you mean? I went to get firewood, came back, and you two were gone. I've been searching for you all night." "We were at the campsite," Sarah said. "We called for you, looked everywhere. You never came back." Jessica frowned. "That's not— I came right back. You guys had left the fire burning and just disappeared." I studied her face, looking for some sign of the thing that had worn her appearance in the darkness. But she seemed genuinely confused, genuinely concerned. "You don't remember anything strange?" I asked. "About your eyes, or—" "My eyes." She touched her face self-consciously. "What about my eyes?" They were brown, normal, human. But she was blinking too little, and her smile, when it came, lasted just a few seconds too long. "We need to get out of here," I said, backing away from her. "Tom, what's wrong with you?" Jessica said, and now there was hurt in her voice. "It's me. It's Jessica." "Prove it," I said. "Tell me something only Jessica would know." She stared at us for a long moment, and in that silence I heard the whispers again, so faint they might have been the wind. But I knew better. Jessica said, and her voice was uncertain. "I don't— Why are you looking at me like that?" "Because you're not Jessica," I said, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her away from the thing wearing our friend's face. "Tom, you're scaring me," Sarah said, but she didn't resist as I led her down the road. Behind us, Jessica, or the thing that looked like Jessica, called after us, her voice growing more distressed. "Please don't leave me. I don't understand what's happening." We walked faster, and the voice faded. But when I looked back, I could see her still standing there, watching us go, and even from a distance, I could tell she wasn't blinking. It took us 3 hours of walking to reach the nearest town, a tiny place called Poolsville that consisted of little more than a gas station, a diner, and a few houses. The elderly man behind the counter at the gas station looked at us with concern when we stumbled in, covered in scratches and dirt, asking to use his phone. "You folks look like you've had a rough night," he said. "What happened?" I started to tell him about our camping trip, about Jessica disappearing, about the things we'd seen in the forest. But as the words came out, they sounded insane even to me. How do you explain to someone that your friend was replaced by something else? That the wilderness near Seneca Creek was full of whispers and impossible creatures? "We got lost," I said finally. "Our friend. We got separated from our friend. We need to call the police." The man nodded sympathetically and handed us his phone. But when I tried to explain our situation to the 911 dispatcher, I ran into the same problem. How do you report a missing person when that person had walked out of the forest that morning, looking perfectly normal except for the wrongness in her eyes? "Sir," the dispatcher said patiently, "if your friend is with you now, what exactly is the emergency?" She's not the same person," I said, knowing how it sounded. There was a long pause. "Sir, have you been drinking or using any substances?" I hung up in frustration. Sarah was sitting at a small table by the window staring out at the parking lot. "She's out there," Sarah said quietly. I looked where she was pointing. Across the street, standing at the edge of the forest, was Jessica. She was just standing there, perfectly still, watching the gas station. How did she get here so fast? I asked. She didn't walk, Sarah said. She was just there. I looked up and she was there. The gas station owner, whose name tag read Earl, came over to us. You folks sure you're okay? That friend of yours has been standing out there for about 10 minutes now, hasn't moved a muscle. I looked at Earl, then back at Jessica. Do you see anything strange about her? Earl squinted through the window. Well, now that you mention it, she ain't blinked once since I started watching, and it might just be the light, but her eyes look awful dark from here. At least, I wasn't completely crazy. Earl, I said, is there another way out of town, besides the main road? He nodded slowly. Old Logging Road runs behind the gas station, connects to Route 28 about 5 miles south. But why would you need— Can we borrow your truck? I asked desperately. I'll pay you whatever you want. We just need to get out of here. Earl looked from us to Jessica, still standing motionless across the street, and something in his weathered face changed. You know what? I think I can help you out. But first, tell me what really happened out there. So I told him everything. The whispers from the creek, Jessica's disappearance, the thing that had worn her face in the darkness, the circle of impossible figures. I expected him to laugh or call us crazy, but instead he nodded grimly. Seneca Creek, he said. Should have known. We don't talk about it much around here, but that area's got a history. Indians used to consider it cursed ground, wouldn't hunt there or camp there, said it was where the spirits of the lost would gather, trying to find their way back to the world of the living. You believe us? Sarah asked. Honey, I've lived in these parts for 73 years. I've seen things that would make your hair turn white. That creek's been taking people for longer than anyone remembers. Usually, they never come back at all. Sometimes— He glanced toward Jessica. Sometimes they come back wrong. Earl disappeared into the back room and returned with a set of keys. My truck's out back. Take it, get as far from here as you can. I'll call it in stolen tomorrow, give you a head start. What about her? I asked, nodding toward Jessica. She'll stay here, Earl said with certainty. They can't leave their territory for long. Whatever that thing is, it's tied to the creek. It'll have to go back eventually. We thanked Earl and slipped out the back door. His truck was an old Ford pickup that looked like it had seen better decades, but it started on the first try. As we drove away on the narrow logging road, I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see Jessica running after us with inhuman speed, but the road behind us remained empty. We drove straight through to Baltimore, not stopping except for gas. Neither of us spoke much during the 5-hour drive. What was there to say? We'd lost our friend to something that shouldn't exist, and we'd left her replacement standing on a street corner in a town that felt increasingly like a fever dream. It wasn't until we were back in the city, surrounded by traffic and noise and the comfortable chaos of civilization, that we finally talked about what had happened. We have to report Jessica missing, Sarah said. Her family needs to know. And tell them what? That she was taken by forest spirits? That something else is wearing her face? We tell them she got lost in the woods. We tell them we searched but couldn't find her. So that's what we did. We filed a missing person report, gave interviews to the police, and helped organize search parties that combed the area around Seneca Creek for 3 weeks. They never found any trace of Jessica Williams. Her parents held a memorial service 2 months later. They asked me to speak, to share my memories of their daughter. I stood at the podium and told them about Jessica's enthusiasm for outdoor adventures, her competitive spirit, her loyalty as a friend. I didn't tell them about the thing I'd seen wearing her face, or about the whispers that still haunted my dreams. What I couldn't tell them was that Jessica, or something wearing her appearance, still showed up sometimes. The first time was 3 weeks after we'd escaped. I was leaving work late one evening when I saw her across the street, standing under a streetlight. She was perfectly still, watching me with those 2 dark eyes. When I blinked, she was gone. Sarah saw her too, standing outside her apartment building one night, just beyond the reach of the security lights. She called me in tears, convinced she was losing her mind. "It's not in our heads," I told her. "Earl said they can't leave their territory for long, but he didn't say they couldn't leave at all." The appearances became less frequent over time, but they never stopped entirely. Always the same, Jessica standing motionless in shadows, watching us with eyes that held no recognition, no humanity. She never spoke, never approached, just watched. Sarah and I broke up 6 months later. The shared trauma had bound us together initially, but eventually the weight of what we'd experienced, what we'd lost, became too much. We couldn't look at each other without remembering that night by Seneca Creek. I moved to Philadelphia, then Chicago, then Denver, always hoping that distance would break whatever connection bound that thing to us. But no matter how far I traveled, every few months I'd catch a glimpse of a familiar figure in my peripheral vision, standing just beyond the light, watching with eyes like black holes. It's been 3 years now since that night in the Maryland wilderness. I've talked to therapists, taken medications, tried every rational explanation for what we experienced. Shared hallucination, trauma-induced psychosis, carbon monoxide poisoning from our camp stove. But Earl's truck still sits in my garage, the keys he gave us hanging from my rearview mirror. He never reported it stolen, never tried to get it back. Sometimes I think about driving back to that tiny gas station in Poolesville, asking him what else he knows about Seneca Creek and the things that live there, but I'm afraid of what I might find. And I'm more afraid that Jessica, the real Jessica, might still be alive somewhere in those whispering woods, trapped in a place where time moves wrong and the lost wander in endless circles, waiting for someone to take their place so they can finally rest. Sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear her calling my name. The smart thing would be to ignore it, to keep running, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that cursed creek. But Jessica was my friend, and if there's even a chance that some part of her is still out there, still suffering, I've been planning another trip to Maryland. This time, I'll go alone. This time, I'll be ready for what waits in the darkness by Seneca Creek. This time, maybe I can bring Jessica home, or maybe I'll join her in the whispers, and someone else will have to live with the memory of my face watching them from the shadows, blinking too little and smiling too long. Either way, I can't keep running forever.